You've been told to stay busy, stay productive, keep moving forward. But deep down, you're tired. Not just in your body, in your soul. You scroll, you chase, you try to stay positive. But the emptiness keeps whispering, something's missing. Maybe you've tried meditation. Maybe you've read all the self-help books. Maybe you've told yourself, I should be grateful. But that quiet ache inside, it's still there. That restlessness, that pressure, that invisible weight on your chest that won't let you fully breathe. Here's the truth they never taught you. Healing doesn't come from doing more. It comes from slowing down, from turning inward, from listening to what's been calling you all along, the still, silent voice within, the one that says, "Come home." Buddhist wisdom isn't just ancient philosophy. It's medicine for the modern mind. It's what monks have used for 2,500 years to face fear, grief, death, desire, and come out the other side lighter, freer, whole. This isn't religion. This isn't dogma. This is a path back to peace, the kind you don't have to earn or chase, the kind that rises from within like breath, like light, like truth. And over the next 3 hours, something will shift. Your thoughts will slow. The noise will soften. And in the quiet, you'll feel it. That calm, that clarity, that deep inner yes. Not because everything is fixed, but because you are finally still enough to feel what's real. You'll start to let go of the overthinking, of the guilt, of the stories you've been carrying for far too long. You'll remember how it feels to simply be, without judgment, without pressure, without fear. This isn't just another voice to fall asleep to. This is healing. This is ancient. This is yours. So breathe, set everything down, and begin. The path to peace is already inside you. Are you ready? Let's begin. You've been taught that healing needs effort, movement, talking, doing. But here's what no one told you. Sometimes the most powerful healing begins when everything finally goes quiet. Not just the room, not just your voice, but your inner world. This is where noble silence lives. Not the kind of silence that feels awkward or forced, but the kind that holds you like water holds a falling leaf. Gentle, still, deep. There's a reason the Buddha spoke of Ariya Tunhibhava, noble silence, not as an absence, but as a presence. A silence so full, it begins to cleanse you. It doesn't distract you from your pain, it welcomes it. It doesn't drown out your thoughts, it lets them pass like clouds. It doesn't force you to understand everything, it invites you to feel what you've spent a lifetime avoiding. At first, sitting in silence may feel like nothing is happening. That's normal. We're trained to chase sensations, results, noise. We expect healing to look like breakthroughs, like release, like clarity. But noble silence doesn't work that way. It works from underneath. It loosens what's been held tight for years. It creates space where before there was only clutter. And little by little, your nervous system begins to soften. Your breath gets lighter. Your chest doesn't feel as tight. Not because the pain is gone, but because you're not fighting it anymore. That's the first shift. Allowing. You stop trying to fix your emotions and you start letting them exist. Without panic, without pushing them away. And in that moment, something important happens. The part of you that's been trying so hard to hold it all together finally gets to rest. your trauma, your overthinking, your stored grief. They all live in reaction. They thrive in distraction. But noble silence removes the stage they perform on. Suddenly, you're not acting for the world anymore. You're not managing impressions or replaying conversations or mentally preparing your next defense. You're just there, present, real, human. In noble silence, the body starts to tell the truth. You might feel aches you've ignored, emotions that rise unexpectedly, memories that surface like waves, and it might feel overwhelming. But here's the thing, it's not breaking you, it's releasing you. For the first time, these pieces of your life are being allowed to move, to be seen, to be heard without judgment, without fixing, just witnessed. And witnessing is everything. Most of your life, pain was either avoided or analyzed. But silence teaches a third way, to be with it. And this being with is not passive. It's powerful. Because when you stop resisting, your pain stops growing. When you stop labeling, your feelings stop controlling you. When you stop running, your nervous system stops firing as if you're still in danger. This is how noble silence heals, not with noise, not with logic, but with pure presence, with stillness that says, you don't have to be anywhere else, you don't have to be anything else. And in that stillness, clarity begins to form. You realize that your mind has been trying to protect you all along, even when it seemed like it was attacking you. Your thoughts, your doubts, your fears, they were never enemies. They were messengers. And silence is how you finally listen to them fully. One of the deepest effects of noble silence is the way it gently untangles your identity from your pain. So often we think, I am anxious, I am broken, I am this story. But in silence, something larger than thought begins to arise. A presence that's been with you your whole life, but got covered up by trauma, opinions, noise, fear. And from that place, you see, no, I have these thoughts, but I am not them. I feel this grief, but I am not this grief. And from that space, healing becomes possible in a new way, not because you forced it, but because you remembered. You remembered that the mind can be noisy, but awareness is always quiet. That suffering can feel endless, but presence doesn't rush. That wounds can be deep, but they do not define you. There's something sacred that happens in extended silence. Your heart gets quieter, your breathing becomes deeper, and you begin to hear a voice you forgot was there, the one that isn't judging you or planning or fixing, the one that just watches. This voice doesn't argue, it doesn't beg to be noticed, it's just here. And when you listen long enough, you start to realize that it's more you than the voice you thought was running the show. That inner awareness doesn't need approval, it doesn't chase anything, it doesn't fear stillness, it lives in stillness. And the more time you spend in noble silence, the more familiar it becomes, like returning to a childhood home that was always waiting for you. You might notice that silence changes your relationship to emotions. Anger doesn't feel as explosive. Sadness isn't something to hide. Even boredom becomes a teacher, because everything that arises in silence comes with a message, and now you have the space to receive it, not with fear, but with respect. Silence is also where your body begins to feel safe again. Without words to protect you, without distractions to cover discomfort. Your system learns it's okay to just be. The muscles unclench, the shoulders drop, the heart doesn't have to race anymore, and from that softness, your entire being starts to rewire, not just mentally, but physically. Silence is not just a mental break, it's a full-body invitation to heal. And yes, your mind will try to resist it. It will crave stimulation. It will tell you silence is a waste of time, that you should be doing something. But notice who is saying that. Is it your deeper self, or is it the conditioned part of you that only knows how to survive through noise? That's where the real practice begins, seeing the impulse to escape and not obeying it. Because the deeper you go into noble silence, the more your perception starts to shift. You begin to hear the subtle sounds, the wind, your breath, the heartbeat in your ears. You start to see the world not as something to conquer, but as something to harmonize with. You feel your emotions not as problems, but as passing waves. And you meet people not through stories, but through presence. You stop needing to speak to prove something. You stop needing to fill every space with conversation. You stop trying to be understood all the time because you finally understand yourself, not as an idea, as a living presence. And here's where something truly profound starts to bloom. You don't just find healing, you find peace. And peace is different from relief. Relief is temporary. It depends on conditions. But peace doesn't need anything. It just is. And once you've touched it, even for a few minutes, you start to know the way back. You start to carry that silence with you into the world. You walk slower. You listen deeper. You speak less. But when you do, your words come from truth. You become the calm in the chaos. Not because you're pretending, but because you've practiced. Noble silence isn't a break from life. It's training for it. Because the world will keep shouting, the distractions won't stop. But now you've tasted something stronger, and you begin to understand. You don't have to react to every noise. You don't have to defend yourself every second. You don't have to keep running. You can stop. You can be still, and you can let silence do the work that words never could. It's not about being passive. It's about being free. Free from the compulsion to fill space. Free from the need to perform your value. Free from the habit of abandoning yourself just to be heard. Because once you've sat in the depths of noble silence, you know something for sure. Your spirit doesn't need noise to feel alive. It needs presence, spaciousness, truth. And now you know how to return to it. Not through struggle, but through stillness. Not through answers, but through awareness. Not through force, but through quiet trust. This is the gift noble silence gives you. Not just peace in the moment, but a path back to yourself, back to the place where healing has already begun, back to the truth you were never missing, just too distracted to notice. You are home. You always were. Now, stay here a while. Let the silence keep teaching you. Let it do what only silence can do. Let it heal you, one breath at a time. And once silence becomes familiar, not just a pause, but a presence, something unexpected begins to rise from within, a loosening of the grip that time has had on your life. The tightness that comes from always being late, always behind, always not quite there yet. You begin to notice how much of your suffering doesn't come from what's happening, but from what you believe should have already happened by now. This is where silence leads next, into a deeper shift, a more radical freedom, not just peace in your environment, but peace in your relationship with time itself. We live chained to the clock. We measure ourselves by it. We wait for the right time. We grieve wasted time. We fear running out of it. But this entire way of thinking, of living, is a prison. One built from belief. One that can be dissolved, not through effort, but through presence. In Buddhist wisdom, there is a concept so quiet, so simple, that most people miss its power. Akalika Dhamma, timeless truth. Not eternal in the sense of forever, but outside of time altogether. A space where truth, peace, and awareness are not things you move toward in the future, but realities that are always here, waiting to be entered. This isn't philosophy. It's a direct shift in perception, the kind that rewires the way you see your life. When you step into timeless awareness, you step out of the story, the one that says, "I should be farther along," "I wasted years," "It's too late," or the one that says, "I'll be happy when," "I'll be at peace once," "Everything will be better after." This future-past loop keeps your heart suspended, never fully arriving. But the Dharma, the truth, doesn't exist in past or future. It lives now, not the clock time now, but the living now. The now that doesn't depend on what time it is, or what day of the week, or how old you are. It doesn't ask you to catch up. It invites you to let go. And this letting go isn't lazy. It's not avoidance. It's clarity. Because when you stop believing the voice that says you're running out of time, you stop rushing. When you stop rushing, you start noticing. When you start noticing, you reconnect to breath, to body, to the present. And suddenly, peace isn't a thing you achieve, it's something you remember. One of the deepest causes of anxiety is the belief that we must keep up, that life is slipping through our fingers, that something critical is always about to be lost. But timeless awareness doesn't play by those rules. It isn't slow or fast. It doesn't measure. It just is. And when you attune to it, even briefly, your nervous system recognizes home, because underneath the surface of all your thoughts, there's a presence that never hurries. It's not interested in your schedule. It's not moved by deadlines. It is calm because it's whole, complete, already. That's what Akalika Dhamma points to. A truth that doesn't begin or end. That doesn't change when the clock ticks forward or the years pass. And the more you connect with that, the more your identity begins to shift. From someone chasing moments to someone inhabiting them. Your mind might resist at first. It might say, "But I have things to do. I need to plan. I can't just drop everything and live in the now." And that's okay. This isn't about abandoning structure. It's about remembering that structure is not where your freedom comes from. You can still meet your deadlines. You can still show up for life. But you do it from presence, not as a prisoner of time, but as a participant in the moment. You start to respond instead of react. You start to act from clarity instead of fear, because you're no longer being chased. This shift also touches how you view your past. Many people are stuck in loops of regret. What they did, what they didn't do, how they think their life should have turned out. But the past, in Buddhist insight, is not something you carry. It's something you replay. and replaying it gives it life. Timeless awareness doesn't ask you to forget the past. It asks you to stop mistaking it for your present identity. Who you were then isn't who you are now. The moment you wake up to this now, you are free to respond differently. You are no longer trapped in emotional time travel. This shift also dissolves fear of the future, because most fear is a projection, a movie made from memories and imagined outcomes. And while the mind tries to protect you with these predictions, it only ends up keeping you locked in stress. But when you touch timeless awareness, even briefly, the fear softens, because the future hasn't happened. And in this moment, this breath, you are already okay. You begin to trust life again, not because you know what's coming, but because you're anchored in what is. And anchoring doesn't mean clinging. It means presence. It means when your thoughts start spinning about what could happen, you return to the body, to the breath, to the still awareness that never left. And in that return, there's a power stronger than any plan: peace. There's something profound that happens when you stop measuring your life by age, by milestones, by what you've achieved. You start to see value in things you once dismissed: a quiet morning, a single breath, a genuine connection. You see that life isn't lived in peaks, but in presence. That insight starts to shape your decisions. You don't rush into things just to meet some timeline. You don't stay in situations just because it's too late to start over. You begin to ask, what is true for me now? And that question unlocks more freedom than any future plan ever could. Living from timeless awareness doesn't mean you lose your goals. It means you stop confusing them with your worth. You stop treating the future like a prize and the present like a waiting room. You start showing up fully, and you begin to trust that from this presence, the right action naturally arises. This changes relationships too. You stop needing others to validate your timeline. You stop comparing where you are with where they are, because you know that peace doesn't follow sequence. It follows surrender. It also changes how you heal. So much emotional pain lingers because of time-based thinking. I should be over this by now. It's been years. But healing isn't linear. It isn't a race. It's a spiral. It's layers. And when you stop rushing it, your body starts to trust you again. In timeless awareness, healing becomes a deep listening. You don't ask, how long will this take? You ask, what is this teaching me right now? And that question leads you into transformation, not by speed but by depth. This shift also affects how you see aging. Instead of fearing it, you begin to honor it, because you no longer see age as a loss of time, but as a deepening into presence. Wrinkles become symbols of experience, not decay. Slowness becomes an invitation, not a punishment. You start to live more wisely. You stop wasting moments on things that don't matter. You listen better. You breathe more fully. You let go of urgency, not because you don't care, but because you now know that life is too sacred to rush through. This doesn't mean you won't ever get caught in time again. You will. The mind will pull you back. Deadlines will come. Old fears will rise. But now you know how to return. You've tasted something real. And every time you come back to this awareness, the grip loosens a little more. Akalika Dhamma isn't just an idea. It's an invitation to step outside the trance of time, to stop waiting for permission to feel peace, to stop believing that your life is late. It's not late. You are here, and here is enough. As you rest in this truth, you begin to trust the unfolding. You don't need to rush into decisions. You don't panic when plans change. You don't crumble when things take longer than expected, because you're not living in the timeline anymore. You're living in the now line. And in the now, nothing is missing, nothing is broken, nothing is behind. There's only this breath, this moment, this chance to be fully alive without needing to be anywhere else. The more you practice this, the more your life begins to take a different shape. One rooted in peace instead of pressure. One guided by presence instead of panic. And from that foundation, you begin to make choices that reflect your inner calm, not your old fears. This isn't about checking out. It's about showing up so fully that time stops feeling like the enemy. It becomes a background rhythm, not a chain around your neck. And in that shift, you start to live from soul, not schedule. This is what timeless awareness offers. Not escape, not delay, but direct contact with what's real. And in that contact, you remember the part of you that never needed to earn peace. Only return to it. So return, again and again, with every breath, every pause, every step. Because peace isn't waiting in the future. It's already here. It always was. And when you begin to live from timeless awareness, you realize that nothing truly belongs to you. Not the past, not the future, not even your body. You no longer cling to time because you've seen through its illusion. But even with this understanding, there's one truth that pierces through every idea, every belief, every plan you've ever made. Everything that begins will end. No matter how present you are, there is one thing that cannot be escaped: impermanence. And it's not a punishment. It's the ground beneath all growth, all meaning, all depth. It's the fire that sharpens your attention, the silence that makes each moment sacred. In Buddhist practice, this truth is not avoided. It is faced directly, not to scare the heart, but to liberate it. The 5 remembrances are one of the most powerful tools for this work. They are not teachings meant for scholars or monks alone. They are daily truths waiting to be seen clearly. And in seeing them clearly, something begins to break open in you, not into despair, but into a deeper presence, a softer heart, a life finally lived without denial. These contemplations are not about morbidity. They are about clarity. They help untangle the fear of loss, the anxiety of control, the constant reaching for permanence that never comes. Each remembrance brings you closer to what is real, not what you hope for, not what you fear, but what is already here, already unfolding. The first remembrance reminds you, this body is subject to aging. No matter how strong or youthful it feels today, it will change. Muscles will soften, skin will loosen, energy will slow. Not because something is wrong, but because this is the natural rhythm of life. Most suffering around aging comes not from aging itself, but from resisting it, from pretending it shouldn't happen. But when you contemplate this truth regularly, you begin to treat the body with more kindness. You stop punishing it for doing what it's designed to do. You begin to appreciate it, not for how it looks, but for how faithfully it carries you, even as it changes. The second remembrance brings you face to face with illness. This body is vulnerable. Not always, not constantly, but always potentially. No matter how much you care for it, it is not invincible. We avoid this truth by clinging to health as a measure of safety. But illness doesn't mean failure. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means you are human. When you see this truth, you start to treat others differently too. You become more gentle with the sick, more patient with your own pain. You stop making health the condition for love. You begin to extend compassion, not just when things are perfect, but especially when they're not. The third remembrance is the most difficult for many. Death is unavoidable. You will die. Everyone you love will die. And yet, in this terrifying truth is a strange mercy. When you stop denying death, you stop wasting time. You stop putting off what matters. You stop living like you have forever. You start showing up. You start speaking from the heart. You forgive more easily. You let go of petty battles. You give thanks for things you used to take for granted. Death stops being the enemy. It becomes a teacher, one that reminds you life is precious because it ends. The fourth remembrance pulls the thread even further. Everything you love will be lost. You will be separated from all you hold dear, through time, through distance, through death or change. Nothing and no one stays. And this truth, when avoided, becomes a source of endless fear and clinging. But when faced, it frees you. It teaches you to love without holding, to appreciate without attaching, to give fully, knowing nothing can be possessed. Even your happiest moments are passing, but that doesn't make them less valuable. It makes them luminous. It makes you present to them because you know you can't replay them forever. The final remembrance is the most inward. Your only true possession is your actions, not your titles, not your bank account, not your appearance or your achievements, only the seeds you plant in thought, word, and deed. Those seeds shape your life, and they shape what continues when the body ends. This isn't about fear of karma, it's about empowerment. You cannot control everything, but you can choose how you respond. You can shape your inner world, one decision at a time. This truth restores your power, not to control the future, but to live with integrity now. Together, these 5 contemplations form a complete shift in how you relate to life. They strip away the distractions. They burn through the lies you've been taught about control, permanence, and safety. And what's left is simple, raw, honest, but also tender, sacred, free. When you hold these truths in your heart, not once but daily, they begin to soften your grip. You stop measuring your worth by what you can hold on to. You stop needing life to be permanent in order to feel safe. You start to meet each day not as a guarantee, but as a gift. And strangely, the more you accept impermanence, the more joy you feel. Not the joy that comes from getting what you want, but the joy that comes from finally seeing what you already have. You taste your coffee more deeply. You listen more closely to those you love. You stop looking past the moment to something better. Because you know this moment is the treasure. These remembrances also transform your relationships. You stop trying to make people stay. You stop demanding they be what they once were. You begin to love them as they are, where they are, knowing they too will change. You forgive more easily because you don't want to carry regret to the end. You speak more truthfully because you don't want to waste time pretending. And when loss comes, as it always does, You are not destroyed. You are heartbroken, yes, but not shattered, because you were not living in illusion. You were living awake, and the grief, when it arrives, becomes a sacred part of the path, not something to escape, but something to feel fully, and then to carry forward with depth and compassion. These truths also make your priorities crystal clear. You begin to see how much time you've spent worrying about things that won't matter at the end. Approval, success, control. You start letting go, not out of despair, but from clarity. You realize life is too short to stay disconnected, too fragile to keep numbing, too precious to live on autopilot. The 5 remembrances don't take you away from the world. They wake you up inside it. They bring you closer to yourself and to others. They invite you to stop waiting to live and to start participating fully, knowing you don't get forever. When you integrate these contemplations, something shifts deep in the nervous system. The fear that once haunted you starts to dissolve. You no longer live in denial of death, so you stop living in fear of life. You stop reacting to change with panic. You begin to welcome it. Because you trust that life is not meant to be held, it is meant to be moved through, experienced, felt, met with reverence. And in this space, healing happens without forcing it. Not because your circumstances change, but because your perspective does. You begin to carry a kind of calm that doesn't ignore suffering, but understands its place in the larger rhythm of existence. You stop resisting what is natural, and because of that, you suffer less. These teachings don't remove pain. They make you more real with it. They open a wider heart, a stronger spine, a softer presence, and in that combination, you find the strength to stay open, even when it hurts. You also begin to support others differently. Instead of offering false comfort, you offer space. Instead of pushing away their pain, you sit with them in it. Because you've sat with your own, you've faced what most people run from. And now you have something true to offer. Your presence, your steadiness, your understanding. This is what it means to be emotionally free. Not numb, not unaffected, but no longer a hostage to your fear of impermanence. You don't need things to last forever. You need to meet them fully while they're here. And in that meeting, there is peace. Not peace that depends on things going your way, but peace that lives in your bones. Peace that comes from seeing clearly and living honestly. Peace that can't be taken, even when everything else is. This is the gift of the 5 remembrances, not a life without endings, but a life lived so fully, so presently, that every ending becomes a continuation. Every loss becomes part of the love. Every moment becomes a doorway into truth. And when you live this way, you don't just survive, you awaken. You don't just heal, you expand. You don't just exist, you participate in life with your whole heart, knowing nothing lasts forever, and that is exactly what makes it all so sacred. When the truth of impermanence settles into your heart, not just as a concept, but as a living reality, you begin to see everything differently. People matter more, words feel heavier, moments feel shorter, and something quiet begins to rise in your chest, a longing not to face this fragile life alone. Not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. No one can walk the path for you. But it's a painful illusion to believe you must walk it entirely by yourself. Because healing is not only found in solitude, it's also revealed in presence. Specifically, the kind of presence that holds, reflects, and strengthens you when your own strength feels far away. This is the medicine most overlooked. Not a technique, not a mantra, but a person, a presence, a noble friend, someone who reminds you who you are when you forget, someone who calls you back to the path when you wander, someone who sits beside you, not to fix your pain, but to remind you it doesn't make you unlovable. The Buddha called this kalyana mittata, spiritual friendship. And he didn't speak of it lightly. In one of the most powerful exchanges recorded in the early texts, Venerable Ananda tells the Buddha, "I think that half of the holy life is good friendship." But the Buddha replies, "Do not say that, Ananda, it is the whole of the holy life." That's not metaphor, it's guidance, a direct pointer to something we often forget, that the path is not walked in isolation. It's supported by connection. Not every connection, but the right kind. The kind rooted in sincerity, honesty, presence, and care. Spiritual friendship is not about having people around. It's not about comfort. It's about truth. A noble friend is someone who doesn't let you drown in your illusions, but who also doesn't shame you for struggling. They see your potential even when you're stuck. They hold you to your highest values, not with pressure, but with compassion. And this kind of presence does more than soothe your mind. It rewires it. Connection, when safe and conscious, can literally reshape the brain. Isolation can deepen trauma, but regulated, attuned friendship can reverse it. The nervous system doesn't only heal in silence, it also heals in resonance, in the rhythm between two people who are no longer pretending. Noble friendship begins with honesty, not forced vulnerability, but a shared agreement to be real, to speak the hard truths, to hold space when nothing can be fixed, to offer presence instead of advice, listening instead of correction. This kind of honesty builds safety, not the kind based on agreement, but the kind based on respect. In the company of a true spiritual friend, your mask starts to fall. You don't need to perform. You don't need to impress. You don't need to manage their perception of you. You are allowed to be fully human, messy, uncertain, afraid, learning. And that permission is powerful. It heals the wound of shame. It interrupts the story that you must be perfect to be worthy of love. Depression often grows in the dark corners where connection has failed, when your pain has no witness, when your story has no listener. But noble friendship brings light to those corners, not to force change, but to say, "You're not alone here." And often, that reminder is the turning point. Not some grand solution, just someone staying beside you when you expected to be left behind. But this kind of friendship is not passive. It's not just about kindness. It's also about challenge. A noble friend calls you out, not to hurt you, but to help you grow. They don't let you collapse into self-pity or hide behind your wounds. They remind you of the path. They reflect your values back to you. They hold up the mirror, not to expose your flaws, but to help you see your own strength. And in return, you become that for others. Not a savior, not a fixer, but a presence, a witness, a steady light. You start to listen better, to respond with more care, to hold space without rushing to give advice. You learn the art of being with another person, not to shape them, but to support them. This reciprocity is what transforms ordinary friendship into spiritual friendship. It's not transactional, it's not based on shared opinions or entertainment. It's rooted in shared intention, to wake up, to heal, to grow. You want the best in each other, not in a competitive way, but in a deeply compassionate one. You don't just tolerate each other's growth, you nurture it. Spiritual friendship also thrives on consistency. Not constant contact, but steady presence. It doesn't vanish in discomfort. It stays. Through awkward conversations, through silence, through misunderstanding. It repairs instead of withdrawing. It forgives instead of keeping score. It returns again and again to kindness and clarity. This kind of connection doesn't require you to be anyone but yourself. And it also doesn't let you hide from who you truly are. It invites your wholeness, the broken parts, the light parts, the parts still becoming. And in that space of acceptance, something ancient in you begins to relax. When depression tightens its grip, when the inner world feels cold and unreachable, the presence of a noble friend becomes a light in that darkness. Not to pull you out by force, but to keep a doorway open. To whisper, "You're not forgotten." This kind of friendship is not about fixing symptoms. It's about nourishing the root. It's about presence over performance, being overdoing. You also begin to see that spiritual friendship doesn't always look dramatic. It can be quiet, a conversation that stays with you for days, a message that arrives when you're at your lowest, a memory of someone who once said, "You're stronger than you think," and meant it. These moments plant seeds. They become part of your inner landscape. They grow roots of resilience where once there was only shame. And for those who feel isolated, disconnected, unsure how to begin, this kind of friendship is not out of reach. It starts with presence, with intention, with showing up again and again, authentically. When you live from truth, you begin to attract those who are also drawn to it. When you stop pretending, others feel permission to do the same. The practice of cultivating noble friendships is also about discernment. Not every connection is meant to be close. Some people trigger old patterns. Some connections drain more than they give. And part of this path is learning to let go of relationships that do not nourish your healing. Not with judgment, but with wisdom. You are not unkind for protecting your peace. In making space for the right connections, you also take responsibility for the kind of friend you are. You stop gossiping, you stop competing, you stop abandoning others when they're inconvenient. You become someone who others can trust, not just with secrets, but with silence, with pain, with truth. Spiritual friendship is not sentimental. It is revolutionary. It interrupts the culture of isolation, of self-obsession, of shallow validation. It offers something real in a world obsessed with image. It becomes a practice in itself, not just something you have, but something you do. You check in with your people. You remember the little things. You apologize when needed. You speak with care. You celebrate their growth. You stay curious. You ask real questions. You become a refuge, a safe space in a noisy, restless world. And over time, you realize that these friendships are not just support systems, They are part of the path itself. They hold you accountable to your highest intentions. They call forth the version of you that you're still becoming. And they walk beside you, not ahead, not behind, but with. The Buddha didn't say, noble friendship is helpful. He said, it is the whole of the path. Because everything changes when you're no longer healing alone. Everything deepens when truth is shared. Everything softens when your pain is witnessed, not judged. So let yourself receive that kind of presence. Let yourself offer it. Be willing to show up, to be seen, to stay, and know that in doing so, you're not just creating connection, you're practicing liberation. This is the medicine, not found in books or theories, found in people, in presence, in the quiet strength of walking together, side by side, toward what is true. Even the most nourishing connection, no matter how sacred, cannot substitute the inner work of letting go. Noble friendships support your path, but they cannot walk it for you. They hold space while you unravel what has been stored for years. But at some point, the weight you carry must be met alone. Not in isolation, but in direct honesty. Because no one can let go on your behalf. There comes a point in every healing journey where the pain is not from what happened, but from the refusal to release what is no longer here. We revisit conversations that ended years ago. We hold on to roles that no longer fit. We grip identities built in survival. And we wonder why we still feel stuck. What makes healing difficult is not always the wound itself. It is the attachment to how things should have been, to who we think we would have become, to what we expected from others. Letting go is rarely about losing what's important. It's about releasing what's no longer real. In Buddhist teachings, this release is called anupadana, non-clinging. Often misunderstood as detachment or indifference, its essence is far more radical and alive. It is the choice to stop grasping, not because you don't care, but because clinging creates suffering. It's the mind's way of holding on to what has already passed, or what it fears might leave, or what it feels it must control in order to feel safe. Clinging doesn't just show up in obvious ways. It hides inside overthinking, inside perfectionism, inside the constant need to fix yourself. It lives in resentment, in the refusal to forgive, in the panic that rises when uncertainty appears. It hides in the need to be understood, to be right, to be needed. These are not small habits. They are emotional chains. To practice non-clinging is not to shut down emotionally. It is to allow life to flow without trying to cage it. It is to meet your experience without turning it into an identity. It is to allow a feeling without needing to make a story out of it. It is not passive. It is one of the most courageous acts a human being can engage in. When you let something be, you are not giving up. You are giving space. Space for the heart to stop fighting, space for the nervous system to stop reacting, space for grief to move naturally instead of being suppressed. This is not about avoiding responsibility. It's about ending your contract with self-imposed suffering. Much of what hurts us most isn't the situation. It's the refusal to allow it to change. A relationship ends, but we replay it. An opportunity is missed, but we define ourselves by it. A version of us is gone, but we keep trying to become it again. The healing begins not by erasing these stories, but by loosening our grip on their necessity. Non-clinging invites us to sit with discomfort without grabbing for control. That doesn't mean we approve of pain. It means we stop resisting its presence. We stop fighting reality and begin to ask, what if this doesn't need to be different in order for me to be okay? Letting be means noticing where tension arises and meeting it with awareness instead of reaction. It is in this space that choice returns. You do not need to believe every fearful thought. You do not need to react to every emotional wave. You do not need to build a life around avoiding pain. You begin to see peace was never about perfect circumstances. It was always about how open your palms are. This practice is especially transformative in relationships. Clinging often disguises itself as care, but true love does not grasp. It gives space, it respects freedom, it sees the sacred in allowing someone to evolve, even if that evolution leads them away from you. Non-clinging is not cold. It is the highest form of respect. It says, I honor your path, even when it no longer includes me. The same applies to our healing. So many suffer not from trauma itself, but from the expectation that they must be fully healed by now. We cling to timelines, to ideals, to versions of ourselves that are only partially true, and in that clinging we create pressure, not progress. Non-clinging does not mean you stop caring about healing. It means you stop strangling it. You stop measuring your worth by how quickly you let go. You stop comparing your journey to someone else's. You rest in the unfolding, even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy. When pain arises, non-clinging doesn't say, push it away. It says, let it pass through. This shift rewrites how we meet sadness, anger, fear. Instead of contracting, we open. Instead of suppressing, we stay with it, without making it mean something personal, something fixed. There is deep wisdom in the body, but we override it by clinging to what we think we should feel. Non-clinging invites us to trust the body's rhythms, to allow grief its full season, to let joy come and go without grasping for more, to welcome emptiness as a part of wholeness. Even our ideas about spirituality can become something we cling to. Beliefs, identities, practices. Sometimes the most liberating act is to let go of the structure we once needed, to allow our path to evolve, to trust that truth doesn't need to be tightly held. It will return if it is real. The challenge with non-clinging is that it requires us to meet life without guarantees. There is no promise that everything will work out as we hoped. No assurance that if we let go, something better will arrive. But non-clinging doesn't ask for proof. It asks for presence. It asks for your willingness to meet what is here as it is. When we begin to live this way, life becomes less exhausting. Not because pain stops, but because the resistance does. We begin to meet each experience with curiosity instead of control. We ask, what is here now, rather than, how can I make this what I want it to be? This shift doesn't mean life becomes easy, but it becomes more real. And real life has its own kind of peace, the peace of not needing to chase or escape anything, the peace of being exactly where you are without the pressure to be anywhere else. Practicing non-clinging also changes how we approach decisions. When we are attached to outcome, every choice feels loaded. When we release the grip, clarity returns. We no longer seek guarantees. We seek alignment. We make decisions not to avoid fear, but to stay true to our values. This makes every step lighter, more honest. In conversations, non-clinging allows us to listen, truly listen. We don't grasp for a chance to be right. We don't need to control how others see us. We become curious, open, responsive, not reactive. This creates intimacy without pressure, connection without manipulation. In practice, letting be can look very ordinary. A pause before reacting, a breath in the middle of conflict, a willingness to leave something unresolved for now, a release of needing closure before you can feel peace. These are not grand gestures, they are small shifts, but they change everything. Non-clinging also supports self-compassion. When we stop holding on to how we think we should feel, we allow space for how we do feel. This opens a door to meet our pain, not with judgment, but with tenderness. To say, it's okay to be here. You don't need to move on yet. You're still healing, and that's okay. Over time, the habit of grasping begins to fade. Not by force, but by practice, by staying, by noticing, by returning, again and again. And you begin to notice something unexpected. Joy returns. Not because life becomes perfect, but because you're no longer insisting that it must be. The joy of non-clinging is quiet. It's subtle. It doesn't sparkle like pleasure. It feels like relief, like rest, like no longer dragging the past into the present, like waking up and not needing to fix anything before feeling grateful. This is not about bypassing grief or avoiding effort. It is about knowing when effort becomes struggle, when trying becomes clinging, and having the wisdom to stop, to breathe, to let it be. In this practice, you begin to live differently, with less fear, with more space, with a heart that is open but not desperate, present but not overwhelmed, engaged but not entangled. And this is not detachment. It is maturity. It is freedom. Letting be is not the end of your journey. It is the ground that supports everything else. It is how you heal, not by reaching forward, but by releasing back. It is how you grow, not by adding more, but by letting go of what is no longer needed. You don't need to carry everything. You were never meant to. And when you begin to release, not just in mind, but in heart, in body, in breath, you begin to return to simplicity, to clarity, to the peace that was never far away. In letting be, you don't become passive, you become powerful, because nothing owns you anymore. Not the past, not the fear, not the need to prove. You are free to feel, free to move, free to rest. This is not a single moment. It's a way of living, a path walked breath by breath, a return to something deeper than control, something softer than certainty, something more honest than force. And in that return, everything begins to open, without clinging, without pushing, without needing to hold the sky in your hands. You simply let it be, and somehow that's enough, more than enough. It's the beginning of peace, and once the grip of clinging begins to loosen, the heart discovers something even more radical than letting go. It finds the space to give freely, without fear, without demand, without waiting for anything in return. The energy that was once used to hold, to grasp, to protect, now becomes the very energy that opens. What was once defensive begins to soften. And in that softening, love appears, not the kind based on need, not the kind born from transaction, but the kind that stands on its own, complete even if never acknowledged. This is metta, loving kindness. And when it is offered without expectation, it becomes one of the most powerful forces for healing. There is a love that the world teaches, one based on reward, condition, and agreement. It says, "I will love you if you love me," or "I will love you because you make me feel safe, seen, validated." This kind of love is fragile. It depends on circumstances. It rises and falls with how others behave, and when it is not returned, it turns into pain, resentment, or withdrawal. But loving kindness, as taught in the Buddhist path, is something entirely different. It is not dependent on being understood. It does not wait to be earned. It does not require recognition. It is offered simply because it is true to the heart to offer it. This form of love begins as an intention. It's a quiet whisper in the mind. May this being be safe. May they be well. May they be peaceful. It starts simply, repeating these words not to manipulate the world, but to align the heart. With each repetition, the mind begins to soften. The boundaries between self and other start to dissolve. You begin to feel what's beneath the judgment, beneath the pain, beneath the layers of story. Metta without expectation is not naive. It doesn't deny hurt. It doesn't ignore betrayal. But it says, even in this pain, I can choose to wish well. Even in separation, I can hold love. Even when I am not met with kindness, I don't have to close. This doesn't mean allowing harm. It doesn't mean tolerating abuse. Metta without expectation is not about staying in destructive situations. It's about cultivating an inner freedom that no longer depends on how others behave. It is the strength to remain open-hearted even when the world is not soft in return. When you practice metta in this way, you begin to heal the part of you that has confused love with approval, that has measured worth by how others respond. The love you offer becomes something you give yourself as much as others. It is not a sacrifice. It is an expansion. You start where it's easy, with someone you care for, someone who brings warmth to your chest. You offer the words of metta, slowly, intentionally, and you notice what arises. Maybe joy, maybe longing, maybe grief. You don't need to change the feeling. You simply keep offering the wish. Then you begin to expand. You offer this same kindness to yourself, not out of obligation, but from the understanding that you too are worthy of this care. You begin to meet the parts of you that were once unloved, the parts that felt unworthy, the parts you learned to hide. Metta without expectation allows you to say to yourself, you are enough, even when you fail, even when you're lost, even when no one sees you. May you be at peace. And then, if the heart is ready, you begin to offer metta to those you don't know well. Strangers, people who cross your path for a moment. You recognize that they too are living with invisible burdens. They too are trying to be okay. You wish them well, not because they've earned it, but because they exist. Eventually, you come to the hardest place. You offer metta to those who have hurt you, not to erase the past, not to excuse harm, but to free yourself from the poison of hatred, to unhook your heart from the cycle of pain. You say the words, not to make them true for anyone else, but to make them real for yourself. May this being be free from suffering. This is not an easy practice. It stretches the limits of what the heart believes is possible. But each time you offer metta without asking for anything in return, something shifts. The heart becomes a little more spacious. The mind becomes a little more clear. The weight you've been carrying begins to lift, not because someone finally said sorry, but because you stopped needing them to. Metta is not sentimental. It is not about feeling affection. It is about training the heart to remain open, especially when it wants to close, especially when pain threatens to harden it. It is not passive. It takes discipline. It takes courage. But it frees you in a way no external validation ever could. Offering this kind of love does not mean becoming passive or weak. It doesn't mean losing boundaries or denying needs. In fact, true metta strengthens boundaries because it is rooted in clarity, not fear. It allows you to say no with compassion. It allows you to leave what no longer serves you without hatred in your heart. The strength of metta lies in its stability. It does not sway with emotions. It does not react to moods. It is a vow you take with yourself to not abandon your own integrity, no matter how others act. You become the source of your own love, not in a self-absorbed way, but in a grounded, responsible way. This is especially important in healing. Many emotional wounds come from love that was inconsistent, conditional, or withdrawn. When you practice metta without expectation, you begin to reparent those wounds. You learn that love doesn't have to be earned, that presence can be steady, that care can be chosen again and again. You also begin to trust your heart more. You stop second-guessing your intentions. You stop hardening as a form of protection. You realize that your capacity to love is not a weakness, it's your greatest strength. Not everyone will meet it. Not everyone will reciprocate, but that doesn't diminish its truth. You begin to speak differently, gentler, clearer, more honest. You stop using love as a bargaining chip. You stop withholding care as punishment. You begin to love in a way that liberates, not binds. And in time, this practice becomes not something you do, but something you are. The wish for others to be well becomes natural. You walk into a room and silently offer blessing. You see a difficult person and feel the pull of anger, but you also remember the practice. You pause, you soften, you choose again. This choice doesn't always feel good. Sometimes metta brings up grief. It brings up the pain of not being loved in return, the ache of not being seen, but it also brings you back to the source, the inner refuge that no one can take from you. In this way, loving kindness becomes a refuge, not an escape, but a return, a home that exists not outside of you, but within, a place you can carry with you wherever you go. You begin to realize you don't need the world to be perfect to offer love. You don't need others to change for your heart to remain true. This doesn't make you superior. It makes you free. Free from waiting. Free from needing life to be different before you can show up fully. Free to give without calculating. Free to care without control. The more you practice this, the less you feel controlled by circumstances. Your love becomes stable, quiet, unshakable. Not because you've hardened, but because you've deepened. You've seen that the source of love is not in the outside world, it's in your own intention. And that intention, when practiced without expectation, becomes transformative. It touches everything. It heals the cracks. It nourishes the soil. It plants seeds that grow long after you're gone. You may never see the full result of your kindness, but you don't need to, because the act itself is complete. This is what it means to love without needing it returned. Not to feel superior, not to become self-sacrificing, but to know that the love you give is not wasted even when it is not received. It lives in you, it shapes the world, and it sets you free. In that freedom, you no longer wait to be chosen. You no longer need to be validated. You love because it's who you are. You care because it's how you live. And in doing so, you become the very healing you once searched for. That's the gift, not just to others, but to yourself. A heart that opens again, not because it's never been hurt, but because it knows that even after everything, it can still choose love. When love becomes something you offer without needing it to return, your heart changes shape. It no longer seeks safety in control or guarantees. It becomes steady, like the earth, able to carry weight, able to give without depletion. But this open-heartedness is not born from ease. It is often carved by pain. And once the heart softens in metta, something deeper calls, not just to love, but to serve, not just to heal, but to help others heal through the very wounds that once broke you. This is where the Bodhisattva path begins, not from perfection, but from heartbreak, from standing inside your own suffering and saying, "Let this be the doorway. Let this be the reason I no longer turn away from the suffering of others." In Buddhist tradition, the Bodhisattva is not someone who escapes the world, but someone who returns to it again and again out of deep compassion. Even with the path to personal liberation open, they choose to stay until all beings are free. This vow is not poetic. It is a living promise to transform pain into purpose. But this transformation is not symbolic. It begins with your real, raw, personal suffering. The things you thought disqualified you, the moments you felt furthest from peace, the nights you thought you wouldn't survive. These are not just setbacks. In the Bodhisattva's heart, they become seeds. Your own wounds become the bridge through which you understand others, not through pity, but through presence. You don't need to fix anyone. You simply know what it feels like to grieve, to lose, to break open and keep going. And this knowing becomes your compassion. This is not about romanticizing suffering. It is about refusing to waste it. You begin to realize that your deepest pain, when held with awareness, becomes wisdom. It teaches you how to be gentle, how to listen, how to stay present when others are drowning in silence. The Bodhisattva does not serve from a distance. They serve from their scars. And that service is not grand or dramatic. It's often invisible, a quiet word, a steady presence, an understanding glance. You learn that what people need most is not answers, but someone who does not shrink away from their pain. This path asks everything from you, not all at once, but honestly. It asks you to stop hiding, to stop seeing your suffering as shameful, to begin using it as a compass. It asks, what have you survived? What did you learn that could help someone else survive? And this doesn't mean becoming a teacher or healer by title. It means embodying compassion wherever you are. In a conversation, in a hospital room, in a moment of conflict, in silence. You bring your presence forward, shaped by pain, refined by love. Your suffering may still live in you, but it no longer owns you. It becomes a source of connection instead of disconnection. Instead of pushing people away, it allows you to say, "Me too." And that "me too" is the end of isolation. It's the beginning of mutual healing. The Bodhisattva's vow is not a dramatic statement. It is a quiet, daily recommitment. To stay open when it's easier to close. To remain compassionate when bitterness tries to take root. To keep showing up for life, not because it's easy, but because love demands it. And this vow is personal. It does not look the same for everyone. For some, it means offering kindness to strangers. For others, it means raising children with tenderness. For others still, it means simply not giving up on themselves. Every act of compassion counts. Every time you choose gentleness instead of cruelty, you live this vow. You begin to understand that compassion is not a feeling, it is a practice, one that is built on resilience, on choice, on clarity. And this practice deepens every time you meet your own pain without flinching, because only then can you meet the pain of others with the same steadiness. There will be days when your own suffering feels like too much, when compassion feels far away. This too is part of the path. The Bodhisattva does not pretend to be unaffected. They do not deny their grief. They include it. They hold it tenderly. And in that holding, they remember why they serve. The path is not about becoming invulnerable. It is about becoming transparent to the truth. When you stop resisting your own suffering, you start moving through life with less armor. You become someone who listens not just with ears, but with presence, who speaks not just with words, but with understanding. And that understanding changes lives, not through speeches, not through advice, but through the quiet power of being real, of being human, of not needing to be above it all in order to be of benefit. The more you walk this path, the more you realize that the wound itself is not the problem. It is the refusal to allow it to open you that creates suffering. Once it opens you, it becomes the very ground upon which compassion grows. You see people differently now. You don't just notice their behavior. You notice the pain beneath it, the fear, the confusion, the unmet needs. And instead of reacting, you pause, you respond. You choose empathy over ego. This doesn't mean you tolerate harm. Compassion includes boundaries. It includes the wisdom to say no, to walk away, to protect. But even then, the heart remains open. You don't shut down. You don't seek revenge. You act from love, not from woundedness. The Bodhisattva's wound is not a badge. It is a door, a threshold. Once you walk through it, your relationship to pain changes. You no longer ask, "Why me?" You begin to ask, "How can this serve?" And that question leads to liberation, not just yours, but others. You begin to feel a sense of purpose that doesn't depend on achievement. Your worth is no longer tied to how happy you are or how healed you are. It's tied to how deeply you care, how honestly you live. how bravely you stay with yourself and others when things fall apart. This path does not promise comfort, but it promises truth. It promises that your suffering is not meaningless, that every tear, every loss, every ache can become part of your offering, not in spite of the pain, but because of how it taught you to love more fully. The Bodhisattva walks with open eyes. They see the suffering of the world and do not turn away. But they also see the beauty, the resilience, the spark of goodness that still exists in the darkest corners, and they choose to nurture that spark again and again. This path changes how you see service. It's not about fixing, it's about bearing witness, about refusing to let anyone believe they are alone in their pain, about being the steady presence that says, "This hurts, but you are not broken. You are still whole." That kind of presence is rare and needed, and you don't need to wait until you're healed to offer it. You begin now, exactly as you are, with your imperfect heart, with your story, with your willingness to care. Every small act of compassion ripples. Every time you show up with sincerity, someone else feels less alone. You become a reminder that healing is possible, not because it's easy, but because it's shared. And over time, the wound that once silenced you becomes your voice. The pain that once closed you becomes your offering. You stop asking for life to be painless. You begin asking for your love to be fearless. That is the Bodhisattva's vow in action, not to save the world, but to not abandon it, not to erase suffering, but to meet it with heart wide open, not to become perfect, but to become present again and again. You walk with your wound, not as a burden, but as a guide. And in doing so, you become the very presence that someone else will one day call a blessing. Not because you had all the answers, but because you stayed, because you cared, because you loved, even with a broken heart. This is the way forward, through pain into compassion, through heartbreak into connection, through the wound into a deeper truth than you ever thought possible, not away from life, but deeper into it. You are not here to escape. You are here to offer what only you can give, your presence, your truth, your heart, shaped by everything you've lived. That is more than enough. That is everything. When you begin to carry your pain as a doorway instead of a burden, something shifts. You no longer see yourself as separate from the suffering of the world, but as someone shaped by it, made wiser, more open, and more capable of holding space for others. And yet, even with a compassionate heart, suffering still arises. Emotions still overwhelm. The mind still creates confusion. What changes everything is not simply what happens to you, but how you see it. This is where right view becomes essential. Samadhi is not just a belief. It's a way of perceiving life so clearly that suffering no longer traps you in the same way. It's the lens that transforms your relationship to experience, especially in moments of emotional pain. Mental health is not just about mood. It's about perception. The way the mind interprets what's happening, internally or externally, shapes everything. A distorted view leads to reactivity, fear, shame, and despair. A clear view opens the path to resilience, balance, and grounded compassion. Right view is the first step on the Noble Eightfold Path, not by accident, but because nothing can truly shift unless perception is addressed. Without clarity, every attempt at healing becomes another form of resistance. But with right view, even difficult experiences become part of the path. This view is not imposed. It is discovered. It emerges when you begin to question the assumptions that have shaped your inner life, the belief that your thoughts are always true, that your emotions define you, that your value depends on success, or that pleasure equals happiness. These views are deeply embedded, often unconscious, and they influence every reaction. Right view invites you to look directly at how suffering arises, not just in theory, but in your own body, your own mind. It asks, what was the moment before the suffering began? What did I believe in that instant? What story did I grasp without pausing to question it? Through this lens, mental pain becomes something to observe, not to fear. Anxiety is no longer a permanent flaw. It's a response rooted in misunderstanding. Depression is not who you are. It's a state shaped by unexamined narratives. Fear loses some of its grip when seen as a habit, not a sentence. Right view is rooted in understanding the Four Noble Truths, not just intellectually, but experientially. That suffering exists. That it arises from craving, not just for pleasure, but for identity, control, certainty. That it can end, and that there is a path. These are not abstract ideas, they are maps, each one pointing inward toward a gentler way of meeting life. When you begin to internalize right view, you no longer assume that discomfort means something is wrong. You start to see discomfort as part of growth, part of release, part of the natural unfolding of impermanent conditions. This takes away the panic. The mind becomes less frantic to fix, to numb, to escape. Clarity replaces fear. You don't push emotions away. You observe how they arise, how they peak, how they fade. You don't make them personal. You don't turn sadness into identity or anger into character. You witness them like weather, temporary, changeable, not who you are. In this space, healing becomes less about removing symptoms and more about relating differently to them. You begin to ask, what is this experience trying to teach me? What can I let go of here? What belief is being challenged? And with each question, the mind softens. The heart becomes more available. The body relaxes. Right view also reshapes how you understand others. Instead of reacting to someone's behavior, you begin to see their suffering behind it. You see the causes and conditions that shaped their actions. This doesn't mean you excuse harm, but it helps dissolve the illusion of separation. Compassion becomes a natural response when you see clearly. And this clarity brings responsibility, because once you recognize how powerful perception is, you begin to take care of your mind more deliberately. You notice the stories you feed. You examine the assumptions you live by. You become aware of your inner voice and whether it speaks from truth or conditioning. Right view is not a fixed position. It's a living practice. It grows as you grow. It becomes more subtle, more refined, more intuitive. At first, it might mean catching distorted thoughts. Later, it becomes an embodied presence that simply knows what leads to peace and what leads to pain. This understanding supports emotional resilience. When life breaks open unexpectedly, right view helps you stay grounded. Instead of spiraling, you remember, this is a wave. It will pass. I don't need to attach to this moment. I don't need to build a permanent story around a temporary emotion. In moments of confusion, you return to simplicity, breath, body, present experience. You don't get lost in analysis. You rest in awareness. You come back to what is clear, what is trustworthy. This moment, this breath, this heart that still beats. Mental health often declines when we fight our experience, when we demand that pain leave immediately, when we judge ourselves for not being okay. But right view shifts that entirely. It says, healing is not linear, progress is not permanent, and none of this defines your worth. You stop waiting for things to be perfect before you rest. You stop believing that healing means never struggling again. You start to accept that struggle itself is part of the awakening. That feeling lost is not failure. It's a call to return, and each return strengthens you. You become less shaken by the mind's storms. You stop needing to fix every thought. You trust that clarity will return because you've built a foundation rooted in understanding, not fantasy. Right view also reframes your sense of identity. You no longer cling to the idea of a solid, separate self that must be defended or improved endlessly. You begin to see self as a process, changing, layered, responsive. This takes the pressure off. You stop needing to prove yourself. You start being more honest, more fluid, more human. With this view, even shame begins to dissolve. Because shame thrives on the illusion of permanence, that who you were in one moment defines who you are forever. But right view reveals the truth. You are not frozen in time. You are unfolding. You are allowed to change. And in this changing, you find peace, not from perfection, but from presence. You stop needing to understand everything before you feel safe. You begin to live with questions. You begin to trust the process more than the outcome. This trust is not blind. It's earned through awareness, through staying when it's hard, through looking when it's easier to turn away, through meeting yourself again and again, until fear no longer feels like the enemy, but like an old story that no longer needs your belief. With right view, even spiritual practice changes. It stops being about self-improvement and becomes a way of remembering, a returning to what is already whole within you. You stop grasping for awakening. You start embodying awareness in small, grounded ways. You speak with more care. You listen with less agenda. You stop rushing past your own pain or the pain of others. You become a steady presence in a world of reactions, not because you've escaped suffering, but because you've seen through its causes. And that seeing becomes compassion, not as an idea, but as a natural result of understanding. You stop taking things so personally. You stop expecting the world to match your preferences. You meet life as it is, not as you wish it to be, and in doing so, you suffer less. This is not easy work. It takes repetition, willingness, gentleness, but it's real, and it lasts, because it's not built on avoidance. It's built on direct contact with reality. And that reality, when met with open eyes, becomes the very path to freedom. Right view doesn't make life painless, but it makes pain workable. It makes fear less paralyzing. It makes joy more accessible. It reveals a different kind of stability, one that doesn't depend on the outer world behaving a certain way, but on your inner world being rooted in truth. You no longer need everything to go your way to be at peace. You need to see clearly. And that clarity, when practiced with humility, becomes your refuge. In that clarity, you are not broken. You are not behind. You are simply here, breathing, witnessing, growing, and that is enough, always enough. When clarity begins to settle in your mind, you no longer run from discomfort the way you once did. You stop reacting blindly. You learn to stay grounded when emotions rise. But even as your view becomes wiser, one truth remains impossible to avoid. Everything you love will end. Every person, every moment, every breath. And it's not enough to understand this intellectually. You have to meet it, face to face, with your feet on the ground and your heart fully open. This is why ancient monks practiced walking meditation in graveyards, not to romanticize death, but to build a relationship with it, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. In a world that avoids the topic at all costs, this practice becomes a kind of medicine, one that cuts through illusions and brings you back to what truly matters. The practice itself is simple. You walk, slowly, mindfully, one step at a time, among headstones, among names, among reminders that every life, no matter how full, ends. But what happens within you as you walk is where the real transformation occurs. The mind becomes quiet, not because there is nothing to think about, but because the mind finally recognizes that most thoughts are not useful here. In the presence of death, complaints shrink, arguments feel small, grievances lose their grip. What remains is a tender awareness, a direct encounter with the truth of impermanence. This isn't meant to make you sad, it's meant to make you honest. So much suffering comes from pretending you have time, from acting as though everything important can wait. But when you walk where others have already finished their lives, urgency returns, not in the form of panic, but in the form of clarity. You start to notice how precious each breath is, how rare it is to love someone and still be able to tell them, how fragile your plans are. Not in a hopeless way, but in a way that brings deep presence. This is what the cemetery teaches, not despair, but presence, not fear, but reverence. Walking among the dead is not about morbidity, it's about perspective. You begin to see that much of what disturbs you in daily life has no lasting weight. The judgments, the need to be right, the rush to be first. These concerns dissolve in the face of mortality, and yet what grows stronger is love. Love for this moment, for the people in your life, for the simple fact that you are alive, even now. The cemetery doesn't numb you, it wakes you up. It invites you to stop sleepwalking through your days. It whispers, pay attention, this won't last. This practice becomes emotional medicine when you begin to apply it inwardly. Not just by walking in graveyards, but by allowing every moment of impermanence to be fully felt. The aging of your body, the changes in your relationships, the passing of days. Rather than resisting these changes, you learn to bow to them, to honor them. In doing so, grief becomes something you no longer push away. It becomes something sacred. You allow the sadness of endings. You allow the ache of letting go, but you hold it with tenderness, not avoidance. You don't try to move past it quickly. You learn to walk with it, to breathe through it. When you do this, grief stops being something that breaks you. It becomes something that shapes you. It carves a deeper well in your heart. a place where compassion grows, a place where you can hold others in their sorrow, not from theory, but from shared humanity. This awareness of death also makes forgiveness easier. You realize that holding grudges is like drinking poison in a burning house. There is not enough time to waste on pride. You don't know how many more chances you'll get to make peace, so you make it now, not because the other person deserves it, but because your heart does. Mindfulness of death sharpens priorities. You stop chasing things that don't matter. You stop trying to impress people you don't respect. You begin to value silence, rest, kindness. You simplify, not out of discipline, but out of wisdom. You want your remaining time to be spent well. The cemetery also teaches humility. Every headstone is a reminder that no one escapes this end. No title, no wealth, no brilliance. Death levels everything. But in that leveling is a kind of freedom. You stop pretending. You stop pretending you're invincible. You stop pretending you have control. What takes its place is honesty. You show up more real, more vulnerable. You speak with fewer filters. You listen with more depth. You stop needing to be right. You start needing to be true. This practice also helps with fear, because the fear of death often lives in the shadows. We avoid it. We distract ourselves, but what we avoid controls us. By walking with death, not as something to fear, but as something to respect, you take back your life. You no longer organize your choices around fear. You stop running. You face the truth, and in doing so, you are no longer controlled by it. You also stop being surprised by change. Loss no longer shocks you in the same way. It still hurts. It still matters. But you expected it. You were preparing for it, not emotionally closing off, but emotionally opening up. You were building capacity. In many Buddhist monasteries, monks are reminded daily, "I am of the nature to die. There is no way to avoid it." This isn't pessimism, it's presence. When you remember that your time is limited, you live with more care. You stop wasting your attention on distractions. You focus it like light through a lens, burning through what's false, warming what's true. This clarity supports every part of your mental and emotional life. You don't take things as personally. You don't attach your identity to fleeting conditions. You recognize your emotions, but you don't build permanent homes out of them. You also grow in gratitude, not just for big things, but for ordinary ones. A deep breath, a soft moment, a quiet morning. These become extraordinary because you see them as temporary, and that makes them luminous. Mindfulness of death also softens regret. You stop looking at the past with bitterness. You start looking at it as part of the path. You forgive yourself, not because the past was perfect, but because it was human. And being human means learning through endings, not just through victories. There is also a strange beauty that arises in this practice. When you stop resisting impermanence, you begin to feel more alive. The fear that once closed your heart now opens it. You feel joy more sharply. You laugh more freely. You love without holding back. This love is not desperate. It's not trying to freeze time. It's a love that exists because of impermanence, not in spite of it. You say, "I see you. I know this moment won't last, so I will be here fully. I will meet it with all I have." And in doing so, your life begins to take on a different rhythm. Not rushed, not frantic, but intentional. You make fewer excuses. You take more deep breaths. You pause to notice the light on someone's face. You realize that every goodbye could be the last, and instead of making you panic, it makes you grateful. This is the gift of walking meditation in cemetery grounds. Not fear, not detachment, but love, depth, presence. You remember what matters. You live closer to the bone. You waste less time. You hold people longer when you hug them. And eventually, you begin to see that death is not something waiting for you in the distance. It is here, in every exhale, in every fading sunset, in every change. And when you live this way, you are not afraid of death, not because you understand it, but because you have befriended it. You carry its truth not as a burden, but as a reminder to be real, to be kind, to be awake. This is the medicine, not to avoid death, but to let it soften your life, not to escape endings, but to meet them with grace. And in that grace, something incredible happens. You stop trying to make life perfect. You start making it meaningful, one breath at a time, one step at a time, with your feet on the ground and your heart wide open. When you begin to walk with death as your teacher, the way you live starts to change. You stop drifting. You stop hiding from impermanence. You begin to make choices that reflect a deeper clarity. And something else becomes clear too. Your inner life doesn't just shape this moment. It shapes everything that comes after. Not just tomorrow, not just your relationships, but something far more profound, the direction of your future becoming. This is where karma stops being a theory and starts becoming personal. It's not just about actions, it's about emotion. It's about how your mind responds when life hurts, when things fall apart, when fear rises. The emotional patterns you repeat are not neutral. They carry energy. They leave imprints. And in the Buddhist view, they don't just shape your character, they shape your rebirth. The idea that emotions create karma may seem surprising, but it's central to Buddhist psychology, because karma isn't only what you do with your hands, it's also what you hold in your heart. The thoughts you cling to, the anger you nourish, the jealousy you allow to loop without examination, these do more than pass. They condition who you become. They guide the momentum of your future states, both in this life and beyond it. This isn't about punishment. It's not about being judged for feeling sadness or fear. It's about awareness. What you feel is not the problem. What you do with those feelings, that's where the karma lives. Not in having emotion, but in reacting without wisdom. When emotion leads to craving, resistance, or delusion, it plants seeds that will bear fruit later. And once you see that clearly, everything changes. You begin to take your inner world seriously, not with fear, but with responsibility. You start to notice what you feed. Do you fuel resentment every time you're hurt? Do you dwell in envy when others succeed? Do you repeat inner stories that reinforce shame? These habits don't just create mental stress, they shape future tendencies. They strengthen emotional grooves that become harder to break. But karma also works the other way. Every time you meet anger with patience, you shift the pattern. Every time you soften into grief without clinging, you open new space. Every moment you choose compassion instead of judgment, You purify the seed. You create a future that is less reactive, more free. This is how you change your trajectory, not by controlling the outside world, but by transforming your emotional responses. The quality of your emotional life is not random. It reflects past choices, and what you do with it now affects what unfolds next. If you meet suffering with aversion, the pain compounds. If you meet it with curiosity, it begins to dissolve. This isn't just about feeling better, it's about ending cycles that repeat across lifetimes. Strong emotions don't need to be feared. They need to be met with mindfulness. Anger, sadness, fear, when seen clearly, become teachers. They point to where your attachments are. They reveal your unconscious expectations, and they invite you to respond differently. But to do that, you have to pause, to catch the moment before reaction becomes habit. That pause is powerful. It's where karmic chains break. It's where awareness replaces compulsion. And from that space, you're no longer bound by your history. You're shaping something new. The Buddha taught that intention is the root of karma, not the feeling itself, but the mental volition behind it. You may feel anger rise, but do you cling to it, feed it, act from it? Or do you observe it, breathe through it, let it pass like a wave? Each choice plants a seed. Each seed holds a future. This isn't about suppressing what you feel. That just creates more suffering. It's about meeting your emotions with honesty and skill. Saying to yourself, "This is here, it hurts, but I don't have to follow it." That moment of presence is what purifies the emotion. It transforms the karmic imprint. Some emotions are subtle: anxiety, insecurity, self-doubt. These often run quietly in the background, but they still leave a mark if left unchecked. They create habits of contraction, avoidance, defensiveness. Over time, those habits solidify into personality traits, into ways of being that feel fixed, but they aren't. They're just grooves worn deep by repetition, and repetition can be broken. One breath at a time. One mindful response at a time. This is where healing becomes liberation. Not just freedom from trauma, but freedom from patterns that continue long after the original wound has faded. When you begin to live this way, emotional maturity becomes part of your spiritual path. You stop asking how to avoid pain and start asking how to meet it without planting more suffering. You recognize that your inner life is not private, it's causal. It radiates out, shaping your future, touching others, reinforcing or softening cycles of pain. This understanding also brings humility. You realize that even seemingly small moments of emotional indulgence, bitterness, blame, pettiness, have effects. And yet, instead of becoming ashamed, you become more careful, more compassionate, because now you know the cost of unconsciousness. The goal is not to become emotionally numb, it's to become emotionally wise, to feel deeply but not drown, to allow pain but not become it, to acknowledge joy but not cling to it, to hold every emotion like a guest, welcome it, learn from it, let it go. This also transforms how you relate to others. When you see how your own emotional patterns shape karma, you become less reactive to theirs. You see their anger as habit, their fear as inheritance, their withdrawal as conditioned pain. You stop taking it personally. You stop fueling cycles of mutual harm. And this perspective can heal generational wounds. Emotional karma often passes silently, through tone, through silence, through learned defensiveness. But when one person in the lineage begins to see clearly, the transmission breaks. You become the pivot point, the one who doesn't pass it on. This takes courage, it takes patience, but it also brings deep meaning. Your healing is no longer just for you. It's for those who came before and those who will come after. You are untying knots that have been in place for lifetimes. Right action begins with right emotion. Not repressed emotion, but conscious emotion. The kind that doesn't manipulate, doesn't deny, doesn't explode. The kind that acknowledges, breathes, and chooses again. This is how you align your emotional life with your spiritual intention. You make the heart your practice, not in abstract ideals, but in the messiness of daily life, in the irritation when someone is late, in the loneliness that creeps in at night, in the fear of being misunderstood. You meet these moments as sacred, because they are the practice. You also begin to track your patterns, not with judgment, but with clarity. You notice which emotions hook you, which ones pull you into reaction, and you study them, not to fix them, but to understand their roots. Often, what looks like anger is unacknowledged sadness. What looks like jealousy is unprocessed grief. What looks like numbness is fear of vulnerability. Understanding these roots allows you to respond with compassion, not control. You begin to soothe instead of shame, to comfort instead of criticize. This softens the mind. It makes transformation sustainable. And gradually, your emotional field becomes cleaner, lighter, not empty, but less sticky. You still feel everything, but you don't carry it as long. You don't rehearse it endlessly. You learn to let the heart move, the breath steady, and the mind return. Karmically, this changes your future. When you die, the emotional momentum you've carried matters, not in a moralistic way, but in terms of energy. What have you practiced? What have you planted? What tendencies have you strengthened? These guide the next becoming. They shape the conditions you'll face again. This awareness brings urgency, not fear-based, but loving. A desire to use this life well, to train the mind gently, to soften the heart regularly, to purify emotions not by erasing them, but by bringing wisdom to them. You start to bow to each feeling as a chance, a turning point, a place where karma can repeat or release, and that bow becomes your prayer, your practice, your offering. In that practice, you become lighter, freer, more compassionate, not just because you've been told to, but because you've tasted what it means to meet suffering with presence and to let it pass without leaving harm behind. This is the path. One feeling at a time, one breath at a time, one karmic seed at a time, until your inner life becomes a refuge. Not because nothing ever hurts, but because nothing owns you anymore. When you begin to understand how emotions shape karma, healing becomes a moral act, not in the sense of good versus bad, but in terms of cause and effect. What you nourish inside becomes the world you live in, and the world you pass on. The deeper you go, the more clearly you see that awareness alone is not enough. You can be fully aware of your pain and still trapped by it. What you need is not only attention, but discernment. Not only presence, but wisdom. And this is where mindfulness evolves into something far more powerful. This union is called satipanya, mindful wisdom. Not two separate qualities, but two wings of one path. Sati is awareness, the ability to observe without being swept away. Panya is insight, the clear understanding of what leads to freedom and what leads to suffering. Together, they do more than soothe. They liberate. Many people turn to mindfulness for relief from anxiety, trauma, and emotional overload. And at first, it helps. It creates space. It reduces reactivity. It teaches you to breathe through storms instead of drowning in them. But mindfulness without wisdom can plateau. You start to notice your triggers but don't know what to do with them. You become skilled at observing thoughts but still feel stuck in the same loops. You feel calmer but not necessarily clearer. That's because observation alone doesn't transform. Transformation happens when awareness is paired with understanding. When you see not just that you are angry, but why that anger returns. When you recognize not just the presence of fear, but the craving or clinging beneath it. This is where panya comes in, to decode the patterns, to untangle the roots. Trauma, in particular, requires more than attention. It requires the capacity to make sense of what arises. Without wisdom, mindfulness can become a mirror that reflects pain without context. You watch the flashbacks, the tension, the emotional waves. But if you don't understand what you're seeing, the practice can become exhausting. You might even begin to fear your own mind. Wisdom changes that. It teaches you how trauma conditions perception, how it warps your sense of safety, how it hides inside beliefs. It shows you that the thoughts arising are not personal, they're patterned. They're conditioned responses trying to protect you. When you see this clearly, you stop fighting yourself. You start working with your experience instead of against it. Mindfulness helps you stay present. Wisdom helps you choose what to do with that presence. It helps you decide where to place your energy, what to question, what to release. It transforms raw awareness into skillful response. And that response is what makes healing sustainable. Without wisdom, mindfulness can also become bypassing. You learn to sit with discomfort, but you don't inquire into its source. You practice acceptance, but you don't question the unconscious beliefs driving your suffering. You learn not to react, but you miss the opportunity to reframe. Satipanya means you're not just noticing the storm, you're studying its cause. You're learning how the mind creates weather. You're seeing the link between thought, feeling, and habit. And in seeing it, you begin to disarm it. This path also teaches you to pace your healing. Trauma recovery is not a sprint, it moves in waves. Mindful wisdom teaches you when to rest, when to investigate, when to just breathe. It protects you from pushing too hard. It gives you permission to soften. It also helps you differentiate between truth and habit. Many trauma survivors carry beliefs formed in moments of deep vulnerability. I'm not safe. I'm not worthy. It's my fault. These thoughts feel true because they've been repeated, but with panya, you learn to question, to ask, is this thought rooted in present reality or past conditioning? This questioning doesn't dismiss your experience, it liberates it. It creates room to rewrite the narrative, to stop defining yourself by what happened to you, to start remembering who you are beyond survival. Mindful wisdom also helps you work with the body. Trauma often lives below language. It shows up as tension, restlessness, disconnection. Satipanya teaches you to listen, not just to feel the pain, but to understand its message. You begin to see the body not as a battleground, but as an ally, a place where wisdom can speak, if you're quiet enough to hear it. And when pain arises, wisdom helps you respond skillfully. Instead of drowning in self-judgment, you practice compassion. Instead of trying to get rid of discomfort, you ask what it needs. You begin to see healing not as getting back to who you were before, but as becoming more whole, more integrated, more honest, more free. Wisdom also protects you from perfectionism. You stop expecting constant peace. You stop measuring your practice by how often you feel good. You understand that growth includes setbacks, that progress includes mess. You learn to trust the process, even when it's not obvious. Satipanya doesn't offer instant answers. It invites ongoing relationship. You begin to view your inner life with curiosity, not fear. You become more interested in the patterns than the symptoms, more attuned to causes than appearances. This deepens your practice. It grounds it. And with this depth comes resilience, not the brittle kind that pushes through, but the flexible kind that bends without breaking. You start to recover faster, to stay present longer, to hold pain without being overwhelmed. You trust your capacity, not because it's limitless, but because it's real. You also become less attached to identity. Trauma often creates a self-image based on protection. I'm the one who keeps people at a distance. I'm the one who never trusts. But with wisdom, you start to see these as strategies, not truths. You learn to loosen your grip, to experiment with new ways of being, to grow beyond the roles survival once required. And this growth is not forced, it's supported. Because with wise attention, change happens gently. You don't need to tear yourself open to heal. You need to meet yourself clearly, consistently, compassionately. That's where integration begins. Satipanya also helps you navigate spiritual practice itself. Without wisdom, meditation can become another place to avoid. You might use stillness to escape feelings, or silence to suppress discomfort. But with Panya, you practice from truth. You don't meditate to rise above your pain, you meditate to meet it with presence and understanding. This alignment brings clarity. You stop chasing special states, you start valuing ordinary presence. You understand that insight doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up in quiet shifts, in the ability to stay with your breath when you're scared, in the choice to soften when anger flares. Wisdom is not knowledge. It's not something you collect. It's something you live. It shows in how you respond to your mind at its worst, in how you treat yourself when no one's watching, in the stories you choose to keep and the ones you decide to release. And when wisdom deepens, your sense of self becomes lighter. You stop clinging to your pain as proof of identity. You stop needing your past to justify your suffering. You stop carrying trauma as your only truth. You begin to taste who you are beyond the wound. This doesn't erase what happened. It transforms your relationship to it. The memory remains, but the grip loosens. The echo fades. The sharp edges soften. And what's left is space, breath, possibility. This is the power of mindful wisdom. It doesn't erase difficulty. It teaches you how to dance with it, to walk through it, to grow within it. It teaches you that the mind is not your enemy, that your emotions are not evidence of failure, that your story is still being written. And in that writing, you have choice. Not always about what happens, but always about how you meet it. With presence, with discernment, with care. This is how trauma begins to heal, not just through awareness, but through understanding. Not just through watching the mind, but through knowing how to guide it. And with each moment of clarity, you take one more step toward freedom. Not the freedom of escaping your story, but the freedom of living it differently, from the inside out. When you begin to see your experience clearly, not just through presence but through wisdom, you start to trust yourself again. You no longer feel like a stranger inside your own mind. You stop fearing your emotions. You stop running from discomfort. But even with clarity and compassion, there are moments when the ground beneath you still feels unsteady. Pain still returns. Doubt still whispers. Fear still visits. In these moments, what the heart longs for most is not more control, but safety. Not escape, but anchoring. Something steady, sacred, and real. This is where the practice of refuge becomes deeply therapeutic. Not as a ritual of belief, but as an act of inner alignment. Taking refuge in the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, is one of the oldest practices in Buddhism. And yet, when understood fully, it becomes more than spiritual tradition. It becomes medicine, a way to return to what is trustworthy when everything else feels uncertain. To take refuge is not to deny struggle, it's to carry it into something larger than your pain. To place your faith, not blind faith, but conscious trust, in that which points to liberation. In the psychological sense, refuge is what we turn toward when overwhelmed. For many, it's distraction, addiction, isolation. But refuge in the Buddhist path means turning toward sources of stability, clarity, and truth, places that don't numb your pain, but help you meet it with wisdom and heart. The Buddha as refuge is not about worshipping a historical figure. It's about honoring the potential for awakening within yourself. The Buddha represents your own capacity to wake up, to break through illusion, to face difficulty with courage. When you take refuge in the Buddha, you're reminding yourself that clarity is possible, that peace is possible, that your current state is not your final state. This is deeply healing for anyone who feels defined by trauma, shame, or failure. The act of turning toward the Buddha is the act of turning toward the best in you, the part untouched by chaos. The Dhamma, as refuge, is the path itself. It's the teachings, the insights, the steps that guide you back to center when the mind gets lost. In a therapeutic sense, the Dhamma functions like a psychological framework. It helps you make sense of your suffering. It shows you how craving leads to pain, how clinging creates fear, how letting go opens space. The Dhamma doesn't offer shortcuts, it offers direction. When you take refuge in the Dhamma, you ground yourself in principles that don't change just because your emotions do. And the Sangha, as refuge, is the community. Not just a group of people, but the presence of those who are walking the path with sincerity. Those who remind you that you're not alone, who mirror your strength when you can't see it, who reflect your wholeness when you feel broken. In psychological healing, connection is essential. Isolation breeds distortion. But when you take refuge in the Sangha, you allow yourself to be held, not in dependency, but in shared humanity. Together, these three form a kind of inner sanctuary, a triangle of strength, a place you can return to again and again, not because it fixes everything, but because it reminds you of what's true. The practice of refuge becomes a nervous system reset, a psychological container, an emotional home. It says, even when I feel overwhelmed, there is something steady here. Even when I forget my worth, I can return to what helps me remember. Therapeutically, this is powerful because it shifts where you place your trust. Trauma teaches you not to trust your body, your feelings, others. But refuge teaches you to place trust where it is safe, in the possibility of awakening, in the clarity of timeless truths, in the strength of community rooted in compassion. This doesn't erase your pain, but it gives you ground to stand on while you meet it. Refuge also becomes a relational practice. You begin to take refuge in wise connection rather than old patterns. You notice who helps you feel more awake, more grounded, more honest. You seek out spaces that hold integrity. You learn to walk away from what pulls you back into confusion. This is part of healing, choosing new places to rest your trust. Taking refuge also brings structure to your inner life. When emotions surge, you have something to return to. Not just breath or body, but intention. You ask, what would it mean to take refuge in the Dhamma right now? Maybe it means pausing before reacting. Maybe it means remembering impermanence. Maybe it means choosing non-harming over winning. This gives you direction in the fog. Psychologically, the sense of refuge reduces inner fragmentation. Trauma often leaves parts of you feeling exiled, unheld, unsafe. Refuge invites those parts back in. It says, you belong here. You are not your fear. You are not your pain. You are held in something bigger. This reframing brings coherence. The scattered pieces of self begin to find each other again. You also begin to live differently, not just in crisis, but in daily life. You start to ask, am I moving from refuge or reaction? You begin to notice when you're leaning into safety and when you're running from fear. This awareness creates choice. You stop reacting out of habit. You begin responding from alignment. The practice of refuge is also deeply forgiving. You don't have to be perfect to return. You don't have to feel strong to be held. Refuge is not earned. It is remembered. No matter how lost you feel, it is always available. This unconditional return creates inner safety, the kind that doesn't depend on mood or outcome. And over time, this becomes internalized. The triple gem stops being external. The Buddha lives in your clarity. The Dhamma lives in your discernment. The Sangha lives in your compassion. You become your own sanctuary, not in isolation, but in rootedness. This inner sanctuary protects you from emotional storms. You no longer need to collapse into despair or cling to distraction. You know where to go, what to remember, what to lean into. The mind may still spin, the body may still shake, but there is something solid beneath it all. Refuge also becomes a source of meaning. When life feels chaotic, you remember there is a path. When suffering feels senseless, you remember there is purpose in how I meet it. When you want to give up, you remember others have walked through this too. I am not the first, I will not be the last, and I am not alone. In moments of grief, refuge brings softness. You don't have to hold it all alone. In moments of anger, it brings space. You don't have to act on every surge. In moments of shame, it brings light. You don't have to define yourself by your pain. This is not about blind comfort. It's about clear anchoring. You are placing your heart in something that doesn't waver with circumstance, something tested by centuries, something rooted in truth, not trend. And this anchoring grows stronger the more you return. Not because the outer world changes, but because your center does. You learn to carry refuge with you, not just during meditation, but in traffic, in conflict, in stillness. It becomes your resting point, your ground zero, your reminder that peace is always one breath, one choice, one return away. Therapists may not always use the language of refuge, but the principle is the same. Safe connection, inner coherence, trust in something larger than trauma. The Buddhist path offers this in a structured, sacred form, one that has carried countless beings through darkness into clarity. You don't have to believe in anything to take refuge. You just have to choose where you want your heart to rest. And when you choose wisely, everything begins to shift. Not because the pain ends, but because the panic does. Not because life gets easier, but because you remember how to meet it. Taking refuge is not escape. It's arrival. It's the act of returning, not just to yourself, but to the truth that holds you. The truth that healing is possible, that clarity is possible, that peace is not a fantasy, it is a practice, and that practice begins now. Every time you turn toward what is steady, what is kind, what is real, every time you take refuge, not as a concept, but as a commitment. One breath, one moment, one return at a time. The more you return to refuge, the more you begin to sense a deeper rhythm beneath all your experiences, a quiet awareness that sees patterns without being caught in them. Refuge does not erase difficulty, but it offers a stable place from which to meet it. And from that stability, something essential becomes visible. Most of your emotional pain doesn't just arise once. It repeats again and again in slightly different forms, but with the same pull. The same habits of mind, the same storylines, the same reactions. This repetition is not coincidence. It's a cycle. And in the teachings of the Buddha, that cycle has a name: samsara. Samsara is often misunderstood as only a cosmic process, being reborn into different lives after death. But the deeper truth is that samsara happens here and now, in every moment where unconscious habits are repeated, in every emotional reaction that loops without awareness, in every false belief that resurfaces even after you've seen through it. It is the momentum of suffering that regenerates itself through craving, fear, avoidance, and clinging. This cycle is not just spiritual, It is deeply psychological. Every time you react to pain with aversion, to pleasure with grasping, to fear with control, you plant the seeds for more of the same. The mind circles back, not because it's broken, but because it's conditioned. Until the conditioning is seen clearly, you live the same emotional stories over and over, each one wearing a different face, but pulling the same strings. Understanding samsara as a mental emotional cycle offers profound insight into your daily life. You begin to recognize your own patterns of emotional rebirth, how one comment can trigger old wounds, how one failure revives an entire storyline of inadequacy, how one moment of discomfort leads to hours of numbing self-criticism or overthinking. These aren't isolated events. They are expressions of an inner loop. The loop begins with contact, a sensation, thought, or external event. The mind registers it. If it's pleasant, craving arises. If it's unpleasant, aversion surfaces. If it's neutral, boredom or restlessness may follow. Craving and aversion give rise to identification. This is good for me. This is bad for me. This defines me. From there, action follows. And often, that action strengthens the very pattern you're trying to escape. This is how samsara sustains itself, not through fate, but through habit. Freedom begins the moment you recognize this cycle while it's happening, not after it's over. When you can see, in real time, the shift from contact to reaction to suffering, you create space. And in that space, a new possibility arises. You don't have to follow the pattern. You can interrupt it. You can choose to respond instead of react. This interruption is subtle but powerful. It's the difference between noticing anger and becoming it, between feeling sadness and collapsing into it, between experiencing discomfort and rushing to escape it. The more you study the process of emotional rebirth, the more skillful you become in preventing it. This is not suppression, it's awareness. It's observing the conditions that give rise to suffering and gently refusing to fuel them. It's learning to meet craving without feeding it, to meet fear without obeying it, to meet doubt without collapsing under it. Each time you do this, you weaken the cycle. Over time, certain patterns become easier to see. You start to notice emotional echoes, how one experience triggers a cascade of others that aren't even about the present moment. You see how the body remembers tension before the mind knows what's wrong. You feel the pull of old identities trying to reassert themselves. But now, you are not asleep inside the pattern. You are awake. Waking up to samsara means understanding that you cannot think your way out of it. Insight alone is not enough. You must learn to stay, to feel without flinching, to breathe through the heat of emotion without building new stories around it. This takes training, repetition, and above all, compassion. Without compassion, awareness can turn into self-blame. You see the pattern and criticize yourself for falling into it. But this only deepens the cycle. True seeing includes kindness. You say to yourself, yes, this is a loop, but I'm not the loop. I'm the one watching, and I can choose differently now. This choice is the foundation of transformation, not dramatic change, but gradual repatterning. Moment by moment, the old tracks fade. The mind becomes more flexible. The heart becomes less reactive. You begin to carry suffering more lightly, not because it disappears, but because you stop reinforcing it. Understanding samsara also changes your relationship to time. You stop believing that healing is about escaping your past. You realize it's about seeing the present clearly enough that the past no longer controls it. Every emotional rebirth is an invitation to respond with wisdom instead of memory. This shift is especially important in relationships. Samsara often plays out between people. One person reacts from pain, the other mirrors it. Without awareness, two people can reinforce each other's suffering indefinitely. But when one person becomes conscious, the cycle begins to unravel, not through force, but through presence. You also begin to take responsibility for your inner world in a new way. Not blaming yourself for every emotion, but recognizing that how you relate to your emotions is the source of freedom or bondage. You don't need to control what arises. You need to stop reenacting it. This path is not about detachment. It's about intimacy with your own mind, with your own pain, with the moments that used to send you into reaction. You learn to stay close to what you once tried to escape. And in staying, the pattern loses its power. One of the most liberating aspects of this practice is the realization that you do not need to solve every emotional problem. You need to stop recycling it. Most suffering doesn't need more analysis. It needs less identification. When you stop fusing your identity with your experience, the experience begins to move. Samsara is sticky because it convinces you that each repetition is new. It tells you, this time it's different. This time you really should panic. But with wisdom, you begin to see the familiar signs, the same tightness in your chest, the same inner dialogue, the same urge to react, and you learn to say, this is samsara. I've been here before. I don't have to go around again. This recognition brings freedom, not from experience, but within experience. You still feel, but you're no longer ruled by feeling. You still care, but you're no longer consumed by caring. You still hurt, but you're no longer stuck in the hurt. And the more you practice, the more you begin to taste a different way of being. A way that doesn't cycle, that doesn't chase, that doesn't cling. This is not detachment. It's clarity. It's the absence of compulsion, the return to stillness in the middle of movement. You begin to live differently, not passively, but purposefully. You stop feeding emotional reactions that never lead anywhere. You stop fighting battles that only exist in your mind. You begin to respond from understanding, not habit. Eventually, even the most deeply rooted patterns begin to dissolve. Not because you fought them, but because you outgrew them, because you stopped believing the old narrative, because you chose to stay present when you used to flee, because you saw the cycle clearly enough to step outside of it. This is the freedom the Buddha spoke of, not in some distant life, but here and now. Freedom from compulsive repetition, freedom from self-created suffering, freedom from the illusion that you must keep living the same story forever. This freedom is not given, it's cultivated through every breath where you choose presence over reaction, through every moment where you pause instead of repeat, through every choice to respond from clarity instead of from fear. And as the cycles weaken, something new begins to emerge. Not emptiness, but space. Not numbness, but peace. The kind of peace that doesn't need to prove anything, that doesn't depend on outcome, that doesn't need the loop to complete, because you've already stepped off the wheel, not through escape, but through awareness, not through denial, but through presence. This is how samsara ends, not in the future, but in this moment, right here, where you choose again and again and again, until there is nothing left to repeat. As you begin to step off the wheel of emotional repetition, space opens inside you that once was filled with reaction. You see how samsara isn't some distant place. It's the very patterns you break every time you choose presence over habit. But not all patterns are conscious. Many of the deepest ones remain hidden beneath your waking awareness. They don't show themselves in conversation, in meditation, or even in memory. They appear when your guard is down, when the thinking mind sleeps and another part of you speaks. This is where your dreams begin to matter. In Buddhist psychology, the mind is not divided into separate selves. The conscious and unconscious are not enemies. They are streams of the same awareness, one more visible, the other deeper, quieter, shaped by everything you've ever felt, feared, denied, or believed. This deeper layer is called the storehouse consciousness in some traditions, and its contents, what the Buddha referred to as samskaras or mental formations, shape how you see, feel, and respond to life, often without realizing it. Dreams are the language of this hidden layer. Not literal, not linear, but meaningful. They are the movement of the mind revealing its residue. When you dream, your conscious defenses fall away. What remains are symbols, sensations, and stories shaped by imprints, both old and current, that still influence your life. Most people treat dreams as random, a result of stress, a byproduct of digestion, or at best, forgotten fragments. But in Buddhist thought, dreams are invitations. They can reflect inner attachments. They can reveal the presence of unresolved craving or aversion. They can show you where identification still grips tightly, and they can give you direct access to patterns too subtle to meet during waking hours. When viewed this way, dreams become a form of practice, not in controlling them, but in understanding them. They mirror your deeper conditioning. If you dream of falling, you might not just fear failure, you may fear surrender. If you dream of being chased, it may point to something unacknowledged in your waking life, a truth you're avoiding, a truth that won't stop following you until it is seen. The goal is not interpretation through theory, but reflection through presence. You learn to meet your dreams the way you meet emotions in meditation, not by analyzing every detail, but by feeling into what is asking to be noticed, the texture of fear, the theme of loss, the craving for control. These are not just dream content, they are living patterns that continue shaping your life. Dreams also hold memories that the conscious mind has let go. They carry echoes of events you couldn't process fully at the time. Childhood moments, relational ruptures, shocks to the system. These imprints can shape your reactions without your awareness, but in dreams, they rise. Not always clearly, often as metaphor, but they rise. This surfacing is not regression. It is invitation. The subconscious is not dangerous, it's wounded. It speaks in dreams because there is space there. In your waking life, your thoughts speak louder. But in the dream world, those older layers come forward, not to trap you, but to ask for integration. You begin to treat your dreams the way you treat a meditation object, with attention, curiosity, kindness. You don't force meaning, you stay with the felt sense. What was the emotional charge? What reaction lingers upon waking? What does the body remember that the story forgot? Through this process, dreams help soften unconscious attachments. They show you where your fear of impermanence still lingers. They reflect your desires, not just surface-level wants, but deeper identity cravings. Who are you still trying to become? Who are you still afraid to stop being? This reflection allows you to bring subconscious material into conscious practice, not as something separate, but as part of your inner landscape. You begin to recognize emotional threads that run across both waking and sleeping states. The tightness that follows you, the sadness you thought you were done with, the anger you suppressed in daylight that re-emerges in symbolic form. You don't have to solve these threads immediately. The first step is acknowledgement. The second is kindness. Dreams can stir discomfort, but they also reveal where you're ready to heal. When seen through the lens of the Dhamma, even nightmares become part of the path. Buddhist texts describe dreams that arise due to karma, not in a mystical sense, but as reflections of deeply rooted patterns. These dreams may not be about past lives, but about past versions of yourself still seeking attention. When you meet these dreams with understanding, you dissolve their hold. You stop being haunted by your own unprocessed mind. This is not about decoding symbols through books. It's about developing your own language of inner reflection. What water means to one person may be different for another. The meaning is not in the symbol, it's in the relationship between the symbol and your inner world. And that relationship is discovered through attention, not theory. The Buddha did not emphasize dream interpretation as a core practice, but he did teach mindfulness of mind states. He emphasized knowing your tendencies, understanding your mental habits. Dreams can support that knowing. They offer raw data from your subconscious. They give you access to parts of your suffering that don't always speak in words. And just as important, they give you access to your wisdom. You may dream of rising above fear. You may receive messages of clarity, not from outside, from the deeper parts of your own awareness, speaking through the language of image and emotion. These moments are not fantasy. They are expressions of the same mind that seeks liberation, even in sleep. By bringing mindful awareness into your relationship with dreams, you extend your path beyond the cushion. Your practice no longer ends when you close your eyes. It continues through the night, through memory, through subconscious release. And what you carry into the next day is not just a faded image. It is insight, ready to be lived. You may choose to keep a dream journal, not to dissect every detail, but to track emotional themes, to notice what repeats, to observe the inner cycles that continue playing out when you are not controlling your experience. These records help you see how healing is unfolding over time. They also remind you that transformation is not only conscious. Some layers of change happen in the quiet, in the unseen, in the places where your attention can only follow once you learn to listen differently. You don't need to become obsessed with dreams. You only need to respect their function. When treated with care, they become another doorway into your own becoming. Not a distraction, but a mirror. Not a detour, but a reflection of the very mind you seek to understand. Eventually, the line between waking and dreaming softens. You begin to recognize that all of it, day and night, thought and symbol, memory and projection, is made of the same energy, awareness shaped by intention. This insight supports the Buddhist understanding that liberation is about waking up, not just from sleep, but from delusion. And every dream, every image, every stirring in the night becomes a reminder. There is more to see. There is more to heal. There is more to release. Not because you are broken, but because the mind is deep. And that depth holds not just your pain, but your potential. And dreams, when met with wisdom, help you find the path down into that depth and gently back out again, transformed, clear, whole. As you begin to listen to the mind, even while it dreams, something subtle shifts. You stop dividing your life into conscious and unconscious, waking and sleeping, practice and rest. You begin to see that the path continues no matter the state. Awareness doesn't end when you close your eyes. Healing continues beneath the surface, and with this realization, another truth emerges. Insight alone is not enough. You can witness, reflect, and even understand your inner patterns. But unless your daily actions reflect that understanding, something remains incomplete. That's where discipline enters. Not as control, but as care. Not as rule-following, but as medicine for the heart. In the Buddhist path, the 5 precepts are often misunderstood as external rules or moral commandments. But at their core, they are tools for mental clarity and emotional balance. They are practices of restraint that free the mind from agitation. They are the behavioral expression of inner wisdom, and when understood deeply, they become not burdens, but therapies, not restrictions, but liberation. These precepts, refraining from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, and intoxicants, are not about morality for its own sake. They are about alignment. When your actions are in harmony with your values, your mind rests. When your choices reflect your intention to do no harm, something inside you softens. There is less guilt, less hiding, less inner conflict. Refraining from killing is not just about literal harm. It's about respecting life at all levels, the life of others, the life of your own body, the life of emotions you habitually try to suppress. When you commit to non-harming, you start to see aggression in more subtle ways. How you speak, how you judge, how you abandon yourself. This precept helps loosen the tendency to push against life, to meet difficulty with force. In therapeutic terms, this is emotional regulation. When you meet discomfort without aggression, you teach the nervous system that it is safe to stay. You stop fighting what arises and begin relating to it. And from this relating, peace becomes possible. The second precept, refraining from stealing, is about more than property. It's about not taking what isn't freely given, not through manipulation, not through pressure, not through entitlement. This discipline helps heal the part of the mind that believes it is lacking, that it must take in order to feel full. It transforms scarcity into sufficiency. Stealing also applies to attention, to energy, to the way we demand from others without awareness. This precept invites mindfulness of how we receive. Do we grasp? Do we take more than is needed? Do we give in order to get? When you refrain from taking what hasn't been offered, you rest in integrity. You let the world give to you in its own time rather than grasping prematurely. The third precept, refraining from sexual misconduct, is often misunderstood as control of desire, but its deeper meaning is about respect. It's about not using intimacy as a way to fill emptiness or gain power. It's about not causing harm through carelessness or craving. This discipline supports healing where boundaries have been crossed by others or by ourselves. Ethically, this precept grounds us in consent, honesty, and kindness. Psychologically, it helps untangle attachment from compulsion. It gives space for the body to be a place of presence, not a battleground of longing or regret. It restores agency and dignity in how we relate to desire. The fourth precept, refraining from false speech, is not only about lying. It's about aligning the voice with the heart. It's about choosing truth over performance, silence over distortion, sincerity over approval-seeking. This discipline supports emotional healing because many internal wounds are reinforced by dishonesty toward others and toward ourselves. When you practice truthful speech, you start noticing when your words create tension, when you speak to avoid discomfort, when you withhold out of fear. This precept is not about perfection, it's about intention. It asks you to speak with care and to listen more deeply. It purifies the relational space. And the fifth precept, refraining from intoxicants, is about protecting clarity. It's about choosing presence over escape. It's not a punishment for indulgence. It's a tool for safety, especially in healing, because substances and distractions often become ways to numb what's too painful to face. But numbing delays healing. It keeps the wound hidden. This precept invites you to ask, what do I reach for when I don't want to feel? What stories do I use to justify avoidance? It teaches you to meet discomfort directly, not because it's easy, but because it's real. And only what is real can be healed. Taken together, the 5 precepts become a kind of internal hygiene. They cleanse the mind, not through punishment, but through practice, through repetition, through the quiet discipline of choosing what is true and kind, even when no one else sees. They also protect what you've worked so hard to build. Meditation creates calm. Reflection brings insight. But without ethical discipline, the mind returns to chaos quickly. Ethics are what hold the ground firm, what keep the space open, what allow healing to go deeper. Psychologically, these precepts help repair inner fragmentation. So much of suffering comes from being divided against ourselves, saying one thing and meaning another, wanting closeness but acting in ways that push people away. These behaviors come from fear, but they create more fear. When you live by the precepts, you close that gap. You become whole. You become safe within yourself. This wholeness becomes visible over time. You sleep more easily. You carry less tension. You speak with more ease. You no longer fear being found out, because there's nothing to hide. This is not about being morally superior. It's about being at peace with your own conscience. Ethical living also shifts your nervous system. When you stop living in contradiction, your stress level drops. When your outer life reflects your inner values, you stop leaking energy. You stop being pulled in opposite directions. You become more grounded, more trustworthy to others and to yourself. And this trust is healing. Because trauma often shatters trust, especially self-trust. Living by the precepts helps rebuild it. You begin to believe in your own capacity to choose well, to care, to stop harm, to start over. The precepts are also forgiving. They are not vows you must fulfill perfectly. They are intentions you return to, over and over. Each time you break one, you learn. Each time you recommit, you strengthen. This process builds resilience, not the kind that avoids mistakes, but the kind that transforms them. Eventually, the precepts stop feeling like something outside you. They become your own, your compass, your inner guide. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What brings peace?" You stop chasing pleasure and start choosing alignment, and this choice brings quiet joy. The kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that lives in stillness, the kind that comes from knowing you are no longer creating unnecessary suffering. Living ethically doesn't mean you won't feel pain, but it means you won't add to it through your own actions. It means you can sit with sadness without shame, with anger without vengeance, with desire without dishonesty. This creates space for deeper insight. When your mind is not clouded by regret or deception, it becomes clear, focused, sharp. Your meditation deepens. Your relationships soften. Your choices carry more weight because they come from a place of true care. Ethics also simplify your life. You stop needing to manage contradictions, to remember lies, to manipulate outcomes. You stop fearing consequences because you are no longer acting against your own heart. This simplicity brings peace, not because life gets easier, but because you are not fighting yourself anymore. You are not tangled in inner conflict. You are not pretending. You are showing up honestly. And honesty is a form of rest. In this way, the precepts are not about being good. They are about being free. Free from inner confusion, free from the exhaustion of inauthenticity, free from the constant cycle of action and regret. And from that freedom, compassion grows. For yourself, for others, for the complexity of being human. You stop expecting perfection. You start honoring sincerity. And sincerity becomes your refuge. The 5 precepts are not a moral checklist. They are tools for transformation, practices that align your behavior with your deepest values, disciplines that support a peaceful mind, and a peaceful mind becomes the foundation for everything else: insight, connection, healing, liberation. This is not about dogma. It's about medicine. Medicine for the habits that keep you suffering. Medicine for the mind that wants to rest. Medicine for the heart that already knows how to love but needs conditions to remember. And the precepts create those conditions, day by day, choice by choice, breath by breath, until your life itself becomes the practice, the mirror, the path. As ethical living takes root, the mind begins to settle in a different way. The storm of internal conflict softens. You no longer have to keep looking over your shoulder. You feel lighter, clearer, more able to sit with yourself. But even with integrity in your actions, something else often lingers under the surface: old pain. Emotional wounds that haven't healed, not because you ignored them, but because they are tangled with something harder to release: resentment. No matter how sincere your practice, it's almost impossible to find real peace while carrying the weight of unresolved hurt. This is where forgiveness becomes not just relevant, but necessary, and not the kind of forgiveness that comes from obligation or forced closure. This is something deeper, the kind that asks you to put down the story of blame, the kind that doesn't depend on the other person's behavior, the kind that frees you, not because they said sorry, but because you stopped needing them to. In the Buddhist teachings, one of the most powerful illustrations of this kind of forgiveness is known as the simile of the saw. The Buddha said, "Even if bandits were to sever you limb by limb with a two-handled saw, he who gives rise to anger in his heart is not following my teaching." At first glance, this can feel impossible, even offensive. It seems to suggest that we should simply endure harm without protest. But the point isn't to accept injustice, it's to understand the cost of hatred. Anger may feel justified, it often is, but that doesn't mean it helps. It burns from the inside, it narrows the heart, it clouds the mind. The Buddha's point isn't that you should invite harm, it's that you should refuse to let harm define who you become. The real prison is not the act itself. It's the story you keep repeating around it, the belief that until someone pays for what they did, you cannot be free. Radical forgiveness is not a denial of suffering. It's not forgetting. It's not pretending that what happened was okay. It's a courageous act of saying, "I will not let this continue to control my life." It is a kind of spiritual maturity that says, I can hold pain without creating more pain on top of it. This is what the Buddha meant. Not that we must suppress our emotions, but that we must not become slaves to them. The simile of the saw asks us to look at where we still believe that holding resentment protects us. The truth is, resentment does not protect, it isolates. It creates a sense of righteousness, but it feeds a cycle of bitterness that never resolves. You might win the argument in your mind every day, but you still lose peace. Forgiveness in Buddhism isn't about absolution. It's about understanding, the kind of understanding that comes from seeing cause and effect clearly. People act from ignorance, fear, pain, and conditioning. When you begin to see others not as evil, but as confused, just as you have been confused, something shifts. You don't have to agree with what they did. You don't have to allow it again. But you begin to see that their actions were not personal in the way you believed. They were patterns, reactions, unresolved suffering passed from one person to another. This shift doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. When you stop taking things so personally, you stop bleeding from wounds that no longer need to stay open. And you begin to understand that holding on doesn't punish the other, it punishes you. The simile of the saw shows you what's possible when the mind is truly trained. A mind that cannot be touched by hatred, even under attack, is not numb. It is awake. That kind of steadiness can only come from deep inner work, from compassion that has been practiced long enough to become reflexive, from a heart that has seen enough suffering to know that adding more will never bring relief. This doesn't mean you bypass grief. Forgiveness includes mourning. Mourning for what was lost, for what could have been, for the version of you that was hurt. But grief is different from resentment. Grief is clean. It flows. Resentment hardens. It sticks. And it usually hides fear, fear of being hurt again, fear of being seen as weak, fear of losing the story that has defined your suffering. But healing doesn't require that story. It requires honesty, the willingness to see how much energy goes into replaying the past, the courage to ask, what am I still holding on to? What part of this pain do I still believe I need? And most of all, the compassion to answer those questions without judgment. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as letting someone off the hook. But real forgiveness is letting yourself off the hook. Off the hook of having to carry something heavy every day. Off the hook of tying your future to someone else's past behavior. Off the hook of rehearsing suffering when there's nothing left to say. This is not easy. It takes practice. Some days you feel spacious. Other days, the memory returns with intensity. You start again. You breathe. You meet it with kindness. You don't force it away, but you don't feed it either. Slowly, the sharp edges begin to soften. The narrative begins to loosen. The energy begins to release. The Buddha's parables help because they speak to these truths in ways that bypass the intellect. Stories reach into the emotional body. They plant seeds. They invite reflection. They show what is possible not through argument, but through example. In the simile of the saw, the Buddha paints an extreme picture, not to shock, but to reveal how deeply the mind can be trained when it refuses to retaliate. Other stories, like that of Angulimala, the serial killer turned monk, show that even the most violent past can be transformed through insight. The message is always the same. No one is beyond redemption, and that includes the parts of you that still feel angry, the parts that wish for punishment, the parts that don't know how to let go yet. These too are welcome. They just need attention, not to be acted out, but to be understood. In healing, forgiveness is often the final release. You may do years of work on trauma and still feel stuck. The resentment that remains can act like a hook, keeping you tied to the very people or events that caused the harm. This is where forgiveness becomes a tool, not of approval, but of release. You cut the cord, not to forget, but to be free. You begin to understand that forgiveness is not always about others. Sometimes it's about forgiving yourself, for staying too long, for not knowing what you didn't know, for reacting in pain, for surviving in the only way you could. Self-forgiveness is the beginning of wholeness, the end of the war within. Practicing this kind of forgiveness doesn't happen once. It becomes part of your path. You reflect, you feel, you choose not to feed the old response. You let it move through. You open your hand where you used to clench your fist, not because they changed, but because you did. Over time, your capacity grows. You find it easier to give the benefit of the doubt, to respond with patience, to say what needs to be said, but without heat. You become someone others feel safe around, not because you're passive, but because you don't carry old harm into new moments. This is the medicine of the Dharma. Not just insight, but transformation. Not just understanding suffering, but ending it. Forgiveness is one of the hardest and most powerful expressions of that transformation. It asks more than belief. It asks practice. It asks presence. It asks humility. And when it's sincere, it gives more than peace. It gives you yourself back. The part of you that is no longer shaped by what was done to you. The part that no longer needs to carry what has already passed. The part that, despite everything, is still whole, still loving, still free. Once you begin to release the grip of resentment, something soft returns to the heart. You stop needing to be right. You stop rehearsing the past. You give yourself back the space to feel fully. Forgiveness clears the path, but grief often waits quietly beneath it. All the loss you never fully met. All the love that had no place to go. The sorrow that once lived under anger now rises into view, asking not to be fixed, but simply held. In this stage of healing, you don't need more thinking. You need grounding. You need to come home to something stable, something real, something that can hold what the mind cannot. This is where earth practices become essential. In Buddhist tradition, touching the earth is more than symbolic. It is a physical act of surrender, a gesture that says, "I belong here. I am not separate. I trust this moment enough to kneel into it." When you lower your body and place your hands or forehead on the ground, you are not performing a ritual for others. You are reminding your body what safety feels like. You are re-entering relationship with the present moment, not through thought, but through contact. Earth touching is used as a devotional gesture, especially in the story of the Buddha's awakening. When challenged by Mara, the personification of doubt and fear, the Buddha did not argue. He did not defend. He simply reached out his hand to touch the earth, as if to say, "This is my witness." In doing so, he anchored himself not in concept, but in the deepest truth of interconnection and presence. For those who are grieving, this gesture carries profound medicine. Grief ungrounds the body. It breaks the structure of life. The nervous system loses its rhythm. Earth touching brings that rhythm back. It says, "Gravity still holds you. Life still receives you." It doesn't solve grief, but it offers a container for it, a place to let sorrow fall out of your hands without falling apart. These practices aren't complicated. You kneel, you touch the earth, you breathe into the ground, you feel your own weight, you let what is heavy inside you move downward instead of staying stuck. You don't need to explain anything. You don't need to force release. You only need to be present with the body, which knows how to grieve even when the mind does not. Grounding through earth contact is also deeply regulating for trauma. When the body has been through overwhelm, it often becomes untethered. Mindfulness may not be enough. The senses need support. Earth touching provides that through the simplest means: touch, temperature, texture, breath. You begin to remember safety not as an idea, but as a sensation. This practice also restores the sense of belonging. Grief can make you feel like a stranger in your own life, like you've been cast out of a world that keeps spinning without you. The earth, however, always welcomes you back. It does not ask for explanations. It does not need your words. It simply holds you as you are. And in that holding, something opens. You begin to feel the larger continuity of life. The earth carries the bones of ancestors, the seeds of future generations, the rhythms of death and renewal. When you touch the ground, you are not reaching downward. You are reaching into a lineage of survival, of surrender, of sacred grief. Earth touching can become part of daily ritual. Not dramatic, just honest. A way to begin the day by reconnecting to what is steady. A way to end the day by releasing what you no longer need to carry. You don't need to wait for crisis to ground. You can build this connection proactively, so that when grief comes again, and it will, you already know where to go. In moments of overwhelming emotion, this practice creates space. You drop to the floor. You place your hands on the ground. You feel the solidness beneath you. You let the tears come. You let the breath slow. There is no performance, only presence. For many, touching the earth also becomes a way to connect with those who have passed, not in a mystical sense, but in a heartfelt one. You remember that the bodies of those you love return to this same ground, that every goodbye is also a return, and in that return something heals. Not completely, not suddenly, but enough. The earth is not just a surface, it is a refuge, and when you approach it with intention, it becomes an ally in your healing. You begin to trust its silence. You begin to feel less alone. You begin to understand that grief doesn't need to be solved. It needs to be held, and the earth holds without condition. This practice can also be integrated with walking. Slow, mindful steps on soil, grass, sand, stone. Feeling each step as an arrival, each contact as a reminder, I'm still here. This form of walking meditation brings your attention out of the mind and into the world that supports you. It's not escape. It's a return to reality through the senses. You can also speak your grief into the earth, quietly, without needing answers. You can name what hurts, what you've lost, what you still miss. The ground can receive this. It has received generations of suffering. It knows how to carry what you cannot. For those who find it hard to speak their pain to others, this form of expression can be liberating. It's not about feedback, it's about release. You do not need permission to grieve. You do not need an audience. You only need somewhere for the weight to go. Earth touching also connects you to your own body. You stop hovering in the mind. You stop resisting physical reality. You come back to the knees, the palms, the breath, and you begin to feel the grief not just as sadness, but as sensation, tightness, heat, shaking. When you allow these sensations without judgment, they move, and as they move, the grip loosens. This kind of embodied release cannot be accessed through thinking. It must be practiced, repeated, honored. Like any form of grounding, its power grows through relationship. The more you return to it, the more available it becomes. In moments of fear, of disconnection, of loss, you don't have to be in nature to practice. The earth is beneath every floor, every city, every bed. What matters is your attention, your sincerity, your willingness to let the body speak. In Buddhist monasteries, earth-touching is sometimes done before statues of the Buddha, not as worship, but as remembrance, as an acknowledgement that the path is lived through the body, through humility, through surrender. You can do the same wherever you are. Kneel, bow, let go. This gesture doesn't mean defeat. It means returning to what supports life. It means no longer fighting your own depth. It means finding rest in something older than fear. Over time, this relationship becomes sacred, not because the earth changes, but because you do. You no longer see grounding as optional. You no longer run from sorrow. You begin to grieve openly, to feel fully, to release without apology. Touching the earth is not a cure, it's a container for sorrow, for confusion, for the deep tenderness of being alive, and that container makes everything else possible. Insight, compassion, Clarity. Without grounding, even wisdom floats. With grounding, wisdom takes root. So when the grief comes, again or for the first time, you know what to do. You don't resist it. You meet it, with hands on the earth, with breath in your belly, with no need to explain, just the quiet knowing, this too belongs. And you are not alone. When grief is allowed to move through the body and into the earth, a deep clarity can begin to emerge. The mind softens, the heart steadies. And in this steadiness, you might begin to notice something subtle. The stories you've told yourself about your pain, the labels you've placed on your experience, the fixed ideas of who you are, how you should feel, what healing is supposed to look like. These aren't just thoughts. They are mental constructions, fabricated concepts that feel so familiar they often go unquestioned. But beneath every concept lies something far more real, something you can't define but can feel. And it's in this space, beneath language, beneath idea, that true healing begins. In Buddhist teachings, these mental constructions are called paññatti. They are conceptual overlays, names, categories, judgments, and beliefs that shape how you perceive reality. They help organize experience, but they can also limit it. They are necessary for functioning in the world, but they are not the world itself. The problem arises when you mistake the concept for the thing it points to, when you confuse the map with the territory. Every time you say, "I am angry," or "this is good," or "they are wrong," you are engaging with paññatti. You are applying a label to an experience. That label might be useful for communication, but it also adds a layer between you and what is directly happening. It creates a mental frame that filters the raw truth of your experience. Over time, these frames accumulate. They shape how you see everything: yourself, others, your past, your body, even your healing. You begin to live inside ideas about reality instead of living in reality itself. You respond not to the moment, but to your interpretation of the moment. And because these concepts are usually inherited from culture, family, trauma, belief, they often carry limitations you didn't choose. This is the paññatti trap. You suffer not just from what is happening, but from the concepts you attach to what is happening. You say failure instead of seeing a temporary event. You say unlovable instead of feeling loneliness. You say broken instead of noticing pain. These words shape your sense of self. They turn changing conditions into fixed identity. Healing through paññatti requires more than positive thinking. It requires seeing, deep, sustained seeing, noticing the concept as it arises, naming it as a label, not a truth, creating space between language and life, between thought and awareness. This space is where freedom begins. When you say, "This is anxiety," and then pause long enough to ask, "What is this?" without the word, you step out of the trap. You begin to meet sensation instead of story. You feel the tightness in the chest, the heat in the face, the restlessness in the limbs. These are not problems. They are experience. They are what's real when the labels fall away. Letting go of concepts doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming intimate with reality. It means being willing to not know, to meet each moment as it is without rushing to define it. It means giving yourself permission to rest in what's raw, what's fresh, what's alive, before the mind has shaped it. This practice is not abstract, it's embodied. You feel it when you drop into your senses without naming them. You see it when you look at someone without projecting a role or history onto them. You hear it when you listen to a sound without deciding if it's pleasant or not. In these moments, you meet the world without filters, and what you find there is often surprising. Direct experience is never as solid as the concept. The idea of pain is heavy, fixed, dramatic. The actual sensation of pain is often changing, moving, fluctuating. The label makes it feel stuck. Awareness reveals its impermanence. The idea of "I am not enough" feels permanent. The moment-to-moment experience of breathing, walking, existing does not confirm that belief. In fact, it often contradicts it. This is why meditation is so powerful. It teaches you to sit still and notice, not just what you're feeling, but how you're naming it. The moment you catch yourself in a thought loop, "This shouldn't be happening. I always do this. They never understand me," you have the chance to pause, to ask, is this the experience or the concept about the experience? When you begin to see the difference, the mind starts to release its grip. You no longer need to fix the thought. You see through it. You no longer need to argue with the concept. You let it dissolve. And what remains is clarity, spaciousness, a kind of freedom that doesn't depend on changing the outer world, but on seeing through the lens you've been using to interpret it. This kind of seeing takes courage, because concepts are comforting even when they hurt. They give a sense of identity, a sense of control. Letting them go can feel like stepping into uncertainty. But it's in this uncertainty that the truth becomes accessible. Not the truth of what should be, but the truth of what is, here and now, unfiltered. The paññāti trap also plays out in relationships. You think you know who someone is. You label them: friend, enemy, safe, unsafe. And then you respond to the label, not the person. You don't see their suffering, their complexity, their moment-by-moment changing nature. You see the concept, and relationships suffer under that weight. When you practice releasing labels, even for a breath, connection deepens. You stop relating through the past. You meet each person as they are now. This doesn't mean ignoring behavior or giving up discernment. It means recognizing that behind every concept is a human being, just like you, trying to find peace. This clarity brings humility. You realize how often you've misunderstood others, how quickly you've assumed, judged, or reduced. You see how you've done the same to yourself, how many times you've lived inside an idea of who you are, instead of meeting the moment and responding freshly. Healing means returning again and again to this freshness. It means noticing when you've fallen back into old categories, when you're living inside a narrative instead of living your life. And it means gently stepping out, not by force, not by resistance, but by seeing. This is where wisdom and compassion meet. You see that concepts are not the enemy. They are tools, but when you forget that they are tools, they become cages. The path is not to destroy them, but to use them wisely, and to know when to put them down. This knowing brings peace. You stop needing to define everything. You start allowing experience to unfold. You don't rush to explain. You begin to trust the silence between words, the space between reactions, the simplicity of presence. And from this presence, you live differently. You speak with more care. You listen with fewer assumptions. You move with less certainty and more curiosity. You meet life not as a problem to solve, but as a mystery to feel. The Paññatti trap is subtle, but once seen, it can't be unseen. You start to catch it in small ways, in the way you think about your body, in the way you describe your emotions, in the way you narrate your day. Each moment becomes an opportunity to return to what is felt, to what is real, to what is beyond the name. And in that return, the mind becomes quieter, the heart becomes softer, the body becomes a place of presence again. Not because everything is solved, but because everything is finally being seen, not through the veil of concept, but through the clarity of experience. After more than 3 hours together, what's left to say? Maybe just this. You've now walked through teachings older than memory, carved by those who sat with their pain instead of running from it, who faced death with open eyes, who gave up control and found peace. You've touched silence not as emptiness, but as sanctuary. You've seen that aging doesn't steal vitality, clinging does. That grief is not weakness, it's devotion. That healing isn't found in escape, but in return, again and again, to the breath, the body, the ground, and the truth that's always been waiting beneath your ideas. You've explored how trauma unwinds when met with wisdom, how forgiveness isn't approval, but release, and how letting go doesn't mean losing. It means finally breathing. You've learned that samsara isn't out there, it's in every emotional loop, and that the end of suffering isn't far away. It's one honest moment at a time. And if any part of this met you where you needed it, if a line, a practice, a silence held something tender inside you, tell us below. What teaching stayed with you? What shifted in you? Your story might be the doorway someone else was waiting for. And if this journey spoke to your heart, don't let it be the last. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next step in your path. This is a space for return, for growth, for peace, for truth. And you're always welcome here. Until next time, may your breath stay gentle, your mind stay spacious, and your heart stay open.